Good evening, everyone. My name's Doug Chipman. I'm Mayor of the City of Clarence. It's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's council meeting. I wonder if all those in the chamber could please stand and join me in the council prayer, please. Almighty God, we humbly beseech Thee to vouchsafe Thy blessing upon this council. Direct and prosperous deliberations to the advancement of Thy glory and the true welfare of the people of the City of Clarence. Amen. I'd also like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on tonight, pay respect to elders past and present, and recognise their ongoing spiritual connection to the land. Thank you. Particular welcome to the members of the public who've joined us this evening. COVID-19 restrictions are still such that only a maximum of 12 members of the public can join us by prior booking and attend in the public gallery through that process. The meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, and what is said in this meeting is not protected by privilege, and there is a link to the agenda papers on Council's website. So first, there are no apologies tonight. Declarations of interest. Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I'd like to declare an interest in item 11.3.1.
Thank you. Are there any other declarations of interest? Thank you. We'll now move to the start items on the agenda and deal with them as one omnibus motion. Firstly, the confirmation of the minutes for the council meeting on the 30th of August and the special council planning meeting on the 6th of September. As circulated, be taken as read and confirmed. Are there any questions on those minute papers? Thank you. I'd like to table the Mayor's diary and other appointments and representational duties for myself, Deputy Mayor, and there's several other aldermen. The next start item is that Council notes the workshops conducted on the 6th and 13th of September and the agenda briefing on the 17th of September. Alderman James.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. My question to you is along the following. We understand legislation is to be introduced into the State Parliament in October of this year, and in that there will be Stadium TAS that will be considered. Are you able to advise the Council as to whether in the short term or in the long term that the Bellerive Oval, Blunston Arena may be included as part of Stadium TAS?
Thank you, Alderman James. And as Alderman will recall from the workshop briefing we received from staff dealing with the development of Stadiums TAS, Bellerive Oval was certainly in the mix. At this stage, I've seen no firm plans or timetable as to when that might occur. Thank you. Are there any other questions in terms of the workshops? Thank you. Moving on to item 6, tabling of petitions. I understand you have none, gentlemen?
No petitions.
Are there any from the floor? Thank you. Item 10.1, reports from single and joint authorities, Copping Refuse Disposal Site Joint Authority. We have the quarterly report of the 30th of June and the quarterly summary of meetings the 30th of August. Did you wish to add to that at all?
No, obviously there's a further matter on the agenda, but yes.
Thank you. And I have nothing to report for Tas Water or Greater Hobart Committee. Are there any other special committee or other representative body reports, please? Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to table the minutes of the Lindisfarne Community Activities Centre Management Committee meeting of the 12th of August.
Thank you. Alderman James.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. The minutes of the Howrah Community Centre. These are minutes of the 22nd of July, and I did mention at the last meeting that I was going to table these, and so it's my apologies for the late comment in late tabling of these. I would like to just seek Mr Graham's comments, if it's okay, through the chair, as to on the advice of the upgrade of Alma Centre, and as to whether or not those community groups that have been obviously locked into a timetable particularly within this financial year and beyond, as to whether there may be a delay of them occupying, obviously taking up their tenancies in relation to the Alma, given there is some delay in the awarding of a tender. Perhaps he could confirm or otherwise that,
Mr
please.
Graham, are you able to help?
Through Mr Mayor, we have informed all users of the delays that's associated with the tender and the works associated with Alma Street.
Thank you. Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I tabled the minutes of the Richmond Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Any other reports? Thank you. Moving on to item 11.1, that the information contained in the weekly briefing reports for the 30th of August and the 6th and 13th of September be noted. Alderman Pearce, did you have a question on those? Or? In that case, I'll take it as you moving that the starred items be adopted as recommended. Do I have a seconder, please? Thanks, Alderman Edmonds. All those in favour? Against?
I was a bit late in raising it in relation to one of
So
these.
you're in support of the motion?
I'll have to go with the motion. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That's carried unanimously.
I was a bit slow off my feet. Thank you.
Okay, moving back to... Sorry, Alderman Evans.
That's all right. I seek leave to move procedural motion that the debate of 13.5.A comes into open meeting.
Okay, so we have a seconded Alderman Pearce that item 13.5.A move into the open meeting, and I'd recommend it become a new item 11.7.6. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Against? That motion is carried. So we have a new item 11.7.6, which is the old 13.5.A. Item 7, public question time. 7.1, questions on notice. So I understand we have two there. General Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. We have two responses to questions taken on notice, and
the questions are in the agenda paper, so we'll take those as read. Yes,
Yep.
if we could proceed with this. Answers, please.
I might ask Mr Graham to provide the answers to the walking track at 7 Mile Beach. There's two sets of questions there.
Thank you.
Through Mr Mayor, the question 1 is the walking track near 7 Mile Beach regularly maintained as it does, so it doesn't become a fire risk to the community? The answer is the walking track is maintained as part of the Tangara Trail maintenance program. This track also serves as a fire trail and is also maintained to allow access for fire equipment during emergency access, or including emergency access. The full length of this track corridor has recently been slashed and maintained over a 15-metre width. The second question was, if the walking track is maintained by council, is there a schedule in place to make sure it is regularly maintained? And yes, it is listed in regular schedule of works associated with the municipal tracks and fire breaks programs. The second series of questions, question 1, does Clarence Council walking tracks in bushfire-prone areas have to be kept to a low fuel state for the safety of persons walking the track? And yes, the council's tracks are maintained in bushfire-prone areas in accordance with the Clarence bushfire strategy. Additionally, an independent track consultant works the approximate 300 kilometres of tracks in Clarence to provide a detailed track audit either once or twice a year, depending on the prevailing environmental conditions. The second question, are bushfire management plans in place for council land walking tracks to keep them from being a fire hazard? And yes, Clarence has a Clarence bushfire strategy, which involves a large number of individual bushfire reserve management plans, including detailed maintenance requirements for tracks and trails in each reserve. These plans are available on Clarence's website.
Thanks, Mr Graham. 7.3, we've got questions on notice from Mr Victor Marsh. They're in the agenda. We'll take them as read. Are you in a position to answer those at this stage, or we'll take them on notice?
Through you, Mayor, 7.3 has answers to questions taken at last meeting.
Which we'll take as read.
Yep.
The answers are in the agenda papers. And questions without notice.
Thank you. I have a question without notice from Mr David Griggs of Risdon Vale. I'll provide a little bit of background and then the questions and the answer. Mr Griggs writes, I have sent a request for 2 road maintenance issues to be addressed in the Risdon Vale area on the 14th of August 2021. No response was received. I had to send an email to the General Manager on the 29th of August 2021 to get the issue responded to. I finally got a response on the 2nd of September 2021 to look into the issue, and as at the 18th of September, no response or action has been taken. The first question is, why is it so difficult for simple issues to be responded to and actioned that I have to keep chasing up the issue? In respect to that question, the response is Council received the first request on the 14th of August and a second identical request on the 29th of August. 29th of August request received an acknowledgement from my office on the 30th of August, and the first request was responded to on the 2nd of September, advising that officers would investigate the request and provide advice. That investigation has been completed and a work order issued for installation of yellow rumble bars at the 2 locations when work crews are next in the area. Mr Griggs will shortly receive a letter confirming these actions. The second question is, will the General Manager ensure that the Customer Service Charter is taken seriously by all staff and make sure that more timely and efficient responses happen, as this reflects very poorly on the Clarence City Council? The answer to that question is that the 2 emails resulted in 2 separate requests into our system rather than 1. While we take steps to avoid this occurring, it is not always possible and can result in delay. I'd like to assure Mr Griggs that Council staff take Customer Service Charter obligations seriously and aim to manage delays as effectively as possible within what is a very busy work program.
Thank you. Moving on to item 8.
Sorry, we have another question from Mr Marsh.
Okay, sorry, I didn't have a note of that. Mr Marsh.
My name's Victor Marsh. I live at 32A King Street, Belrive. On May the 21st, 2020, the Mercury reported that work on the Belrive Public Pier was expected to be finished by September 2020. I understand that a number of unavoidable delays have occurred. My question is, what is currently delaying the opening of the pier?
Mr Graham, are you able to advise us?
Through Mr Mayor, so the last time I reported to the council meeting in terms of opening up the pier, we advised council that there were underwater and grouting works that needed to be undertaken. These are complete. We've undertaken a defects inspection in terms of getting it ready to open the council up to the public. We've identified one non-conformance, which the engineers have identified as well. We've informed the contractor of this, and we're waiting a response to address the non-conformance. Once this has been known, I'll then be able to give the timing of opening of the pier to the council.
Thank you, Mr Marsh.
I've got one more.
Sure.
Second question. As more developments are approved in Belrive Village Precinct and a percentage of... As more developments are approved in the Belrive Village Precinct and a percentage of ferry patrons are parking and riding, on-street parking is spreading like a cancer around the surrounding streets and on the bluff. This is resulting in increased line of sight issues for all road users, and safety of movement is being affected. The question is, how are the council currently monitoring the situation?
Mr Graham.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we are undertaking parking surveys at present. We did the week before, or a week or two before the ferry service started, and we are continuing on that. Once we've done analysis on the trends, I'll be able to be in a position to inform council as to what actions are recommended.
Thank you, Mr Marsh. Any others? Gentlemen. Moving on to item 8. Deputations by members of the public. I believe we have 4.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, we have 4. Our first deputation is from Mr Tassie Strafkos, about 24 Victoria Esplanade.
As Mr Strafkos is coming forward, I remind all speakers that under meeting regs there's only an opportunity for 3 minutes. There will be a warning tone, go at 2.5 minutes to give you an opportunity to wrap up.
Well, first off, thank you for the opportunity to give this deposition. Yes, so this relates to 24 Victoria Esplanade. We live next door to that property. Just to provide a little bit of a picture, because the actual council papers I don't think actually give you full context as to our concerns. The property's on a corner. It's on a prominent corner. It actually is effectively on... There's 3 sides to it that are highly prominent. It's a historic property that has had, since we've been there, had renovations in 2012 and 13, they're referred to in your papers. Those renovations, the additions there are actually in keeping with the historic nature of the property. However, I understand from a heritage perspective, they're treated as modern. This proposal is for a fence. It's classified as a fence. It goes to 3 metres high. The existing fence there is 2.45 metres high. That's over the permitted 2.1 metres high, and the fence extends to 3.7. The Heritage have actually provided an exemption. I contend that that exemption is incorrect and made an error in the sense that the actual impact of that screen and the colours that it has, it suggests there's a condition there that says it has to be white. The actual guidelines provides it needs to be dark or not have a high visual impact. It's a screen that's either solid or it's a louver, so it could actually be solid or have gaps in it. But from our perspective, it's actually solid. And from the street, its visibility, bearing in mind that it's proposed that it be white and not red, which is what the roofs of that site actually are. They're all red. And this is proposed to be white. In the actual exemption, it refers to the weatherboards being white. They're actually cream, and there's actually white in the eaves. So it has high visual impact. It's not subservient to the actual main buildings on the site, and the main building being the original structure, but then in the context of the site, you've got other buildings there as well. From other aspects in terms of heritage, is the actual size of it. It's 32 square metres. The actual development is 32 square metres. The recommendation of the footprint is actually 18 square metres, so that's 90% more. I mentioned about it, there won't be subservient. It would actually be effectively a floating solid screen, highly visible. Like I said, it's on a corner block, and in relation to our property, we have an L-shaped property and look straight onto this property. We understand the need for some privacy, although at the moment it's actually not that visible in terms of the pool area that it's covered. We feel that a more appropriate structure would be a flat structure, that 2.45 metres, which provides a lot of height above the pool area and much lower than the 3.7 which is requested, which is considerably higher.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jane Cameron in respect to 37 Bastick Street.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for your time tonight. My name is Monica Cameron. I'm speaking on behalf of my sister, Jane Cameron. I live in Rosny at 6 Balaka Street, and I submitted a representation objecting to the proposed development at 37 Bastick Street that you're considering here tonight. So as I said, I'm speaking on behalf of my sister Jane, who actually lives directly next door to this property at 35 Bastick Street, which is the property to the north. I'm a qualified town planner myself. I work at a planning firm here in Hobart. I have a master's in urban planning and have been working as a planner for nearly 10 years now. Jane first found out about this proposed extension to the house next door to her when she received a letter in the mail from council and then saw the sign being erected. She was disappointed and a bit upset that her neighbours had not consulted her about this and was concerned particularly about the scale and the bulk of the development. She therefore naturally asked for my assistance in preparing an objection. I won't rehash what's being proposed, as I know you'd all be familiar with what the extension entails and also the assessment that was undertaken by council's planning staff. I'd instead like to focus on why we believe this to be an inappropriate development for the site and why you should also consider refusing the application. The proposed development, firstly, is not contained within the building envelope that is stipulated under clause 10.4.2A3 in the planning scheme. To satisfy this criteria, it must be demonstrated that the proposed development will not cause an unreasonable loss of amenity to the adjoining properties, so 35 and 39 Bastick Street. We believe it doesn't satisfy this criteria for the following reasons. It will cause a reduction in sunlight to Jane's neighbours living at 39 Bastick Street to the south. This will mean that their habitable room windows along the northern elevation will be darker for a longer time during the day than under the current conditions. It will also cause a greater amount of overshadowing to their private open space, particularly between the hours of 9 a.m. and 1 p.m, typical hours that you'd use your backyard. It will also cause visual impacts. The deck and the dining room on the northeastern corner of the subject site are very close to the shared boundary at 35 Bastick Street. They're currently proposing a carport that sits directly on the shared boundary and then a new dining and living room that will be only 1.3 metres from that boundary. When this is viewed from my sister's house, she'll be looking out at a 5.6 metre long wall, which is not a very pleasant view to look at. The other reasons for refusal would be that it does not meet clause 10.4.3, which requires dwellings to provide private open space that meets certain criteria. None of these have been met, and privacy requirements have also not been met. So this results in one of the new decks that will sit directly next to her private open space being able to view straight into her backyard, and this has not been screened at all. For these reasons, we would ask this application be refused.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Our third speaker tonight is Dean Richards in respect to 52 Richardson's Road.
Mr Mayor and Alderman, thank you for taking the time to listen. On behalf of myself, Nick Masters and the rest of the project team, I'd just like to make a short deputation in regard to agenda item 11.7.1 regarding our application to amend the urban growth boundary at 52 Richardson's Road. On the 9th of February, Council resolved to support our application to amend the urban growth boundary. This decision gave us confidence to start active consultation with the local community regarding our vision for the property, as instructed in line with the recommendation option 1 of the officer's report. In fact, we're actually surprised that there actually are any other options, because we were sent away and told that this was the proper process to follow, which is what we want to adhere to. So on the 27th of April, we held a drop-in information session at the Lauderdale Tavern. The session was very well attended with around 70 people coming along to discuss the concept and the process. The drop-in was very positive with some great introductions to local residents, and the feedback received that will be used to drive future discussions with the community around the master plan and the concept. We provided everybody who attended with some printed information, including details of a dedicated website we'd set up. The website provided a lot of information and the opportunity for people to directly contact us to discuss the concept. We also included a full-page article in the July edition of the Eastern Shore Sun that encouraged everyone to contact us via the contact page of the website, with an opportunity to start deeper conversations regarding the project. To date, we've had about 150 visits to the website, which is very pleasing. although the only real active engagement we've had is from people who want to purchase a property in a possible future development. So following Council's endorsement of our application, we've followed the processes outlined by the Minister's Office and Planning Policy Unit. We've provided all requested information from the Minister's Office and the Council also available data, both publicly available and provided by the Council. We were advised by the Council in April that once we had provided the requested information to the best of our ability, Council would accept that response and forward all information to the Minister's Office, other southern regional councils as per the PPU process. This process is stated in option 1 of the Office's report, has recently been followed by both Hobart and Brighton councils with similar applications. They each supported for an adjustment to the urban growth boundary within their LGA. We suggest Council's adoption of option 1 is appropriate and consistent with this process. This was the option we were instructed to follow, and this is the course we have followed. Should the Minister approve our application that has previously been supported by Council, we would remain committed to extensive consultation within the community, Council and other stakeholders. Our vision to work with the community and the Council to develop best practice urban design surrounded by regionally significant environmental protections and public open space for the whole community to enjoy. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Our final speaker tonight is Catherine O'Donnell, also in relation to 52 Richardson's Road.
Thank you. My name's Catherine O'Donnell. I'm a resident of Lauderdale and I wish to briefly address you tonight in regard to item 11.7.1 relating to the land at 52 Richardson's Road, Sandford. I'm speaking here tonight on behalf of a large group of Lauderdale and Sandford residents who are strongly opposed to this extension to the UGB. Council first considered this matter at the meeting of February 9 this year, and despite an officer's report recommending refusal of the proposed extension, Council resolved to support the proposed expansion. This decision was not supported by the local community and is not supported, and a petition was submitted to Council with 256 signatories requesting Council to reconsider the proposal and to consult first with the community. This didn't occur, and the proposal was submitted to the Minister for Planning for his consideration. The Minister advised that the matter could not be considered until the requirements of the Planning Policy Unit's information sheet reviewing and amending regional land use strategies had been addressed. Subsequently, Council directed the opponent of the rezoning to address the requirements of that information sheet. We now find the matters back before Council, and as the officer's report once again clearly states, not all criteria required in the information sheet has been addressed. On this basis alone, it is our view that Council should resolve that the response from the proponent does not satisfy the Minister's requirements and should not continue to support this proposal. This is option 4 at clause 10.4 in the officer's report. Council should not continue to press on and undertake further consultation at the Council and the community's time and expense when your own officer's reports and community sentiment, as demonstrated by the petition, are so strongly opposed to this proposal. The proposal should not proceed on the following basis. The proposal will exacerbate the impact of sprawl and compound costs associated with infrastructure and service provision, which will in the longer term be subsidised by the broader community. The proposal is inconsistent with the Minister's proposed amendment to the Southern Tasmanian Regional Land Use Strategy. The increased traffic load on Bayview Road would adversely impact residential amenity for the local residents, extending right down the peninsula, and the proposal still fails to address all of the information requirements of the Minister's information sheet. Some will put forward an argument that this is only a proposal to extend the UGB and is in itself not an approval to rezone or undertake small lot subdivision in this area. We reject this argument on the basis that once the UGB expansion is approved, rezoning and small lot subdivision and the consequent unacceptable impacts on our community will virtually become as of right for the developer. As your planners have advised you, this is a proposal that's premature in nature and in timing, and we therefore call on Council to reject this proposal and abandon any extension of the UGB to include 52 Richardson's Road. I thank you for the opportunity to address Council.
Thank you. That completes the deputations, General Manager. We'll move to the next item is 11.2, determination of petitions, in particular one for Seamiston Longview Walks in Lauderdale. Thank you, Alderman Bromley. Second, Alderman Newington. Alderman Bromley.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
No, I'm happy, Mr Mayor.
Any other speakers? In that case, I'll put the motion that we note the intent and authorise the GM to conduct a survey of residents. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Alderman Bromley. I advise that Council now intends to sit as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. First item is 11.3.1. It's a development application at 24 Victoria Esplanade, Belrive, for fencing. Thank you, Alderman Newington. Do I have a seconder, please? Thanks, Alderman Mulder. Alderman Newington.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I mean, after reading through the report, it seems quite obvious that the proponent here has gone through all the processes to seek approval to do something, dealing with heritage issues, dealing with council DA issues, and have done everything they can to comply. Like with most of the DAs that we see come through to us now, people will exercise their right to object and to say they don't like aspects of the development, but in this situation here, the staff have detailed in plenty of instances the reasons why it should be approved. And as we've found with these sort of situations, when we decide not to approve them, it usually goes through to the Planning Commission and it comes back to us and we have to approve it. So I'd encourage my colleagues to vote in support of this one and take the advice that we've been provided here. Sometimes these things are controversial, but I mean, it's their land. They have a right to make improvements to their land, and all the information I've seen in the report suggests that the amount of issues caused to the nearby landowners is certainly not worthy of us knocking this one back. So I'd encourage everyone to support this one.
Thank you, Alderman Mulder.
I seconded it for the purposes of debate, but I'm starting to wonder now. I basically think that this wall is unnecessarily high, it's obtrusive, it doesn't meet a whole heap of other particular requirements, it was not my intention to support this on the basis that I think this is a classic case where the development overall is fine, but some of the adjustments that could be required could be solved at a mediation level. So whether this gets through tonight or not, I would strongly recommend that some appeal be done and from one party or the other with a view to doing it. It's 3 metres high on a sloping boundary. It's huge, 3.7. And as we heard from tonight, 2.4 metres is adequate to provide the cover and protection of that particular area and to provide some privacy to the area below. I was there on Sunday, yesterday, and I must say I walked up and down the street and I tried to see the impact of this fence from the street level of the neighbouring balcony, and I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it's necessary, and it's just too large. So I won't be supporting this particular development, even though I seconded it. But I think in the end we have to make a decision. The thing is that I'm not too sure that, but we'll see how it goes. To me.
Thank you. Alderman Edmonds.
Yes, just very quickly. I don't have a hell of a lot to add to that. I don't. The mover said these things are sometimes controversial, and I have to wonder what is it with pools in this sort of area of Clarence. But I don't think it has to be controversial. I do agree that a level of mediation that might come from this would be a good result, because, I don't doubt that the processes were followed either. Of course they were, but the outcome is is unpalatable to me. To see that pole and to see the dimensions that have been mentioned by Alderman Mulder in the place that it is, I think no, start again. So I'll be voting to refuse.
Thank you. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It is interesting to note that in the officer's report on page 42, it says in relation to the Historic Heritage Code that colours, and I quote on E13.8.2p1, colours are also considered appropriate with a condition to require the development to be white to match the existing white weatherboard colour of the dwelling, unquote. In fact, that is not the case. It's only under the eaves that, in fact, it is white, and therefore the rest of the building is of a well, not white, but it's of a shade, if you can call it that, of white. So it doesn't match that at all. The other point that's interesting to note, and if you had received that representation from the Speaker and observed where this blanket, white blanket, is basically erected to block out any sort of, and we're not talking about visual basically here as far as the views are concerned, but in relation to a wall, a white wall, which by the very nature of being so high and of 32 square metres, you know, that's sort of really out of keeping with the amenity of the area. And also it's surprising that Council's Heritage Advisor has sort of made the comment that this was in sort of keeping, appears to be compatible to principal heritage-built forms upon the subject site within the broader precinct by virtue of the simplistic and subservient design, unquote. Again, this is really quite out of keeping with the area, and I think that something in relation to that wonderful area that we have in Bellreeve Bluff, that to have something like this that stands out and detracts from the amenity of this historic area, I think it's unfortunate. I will speak and vote to refuse this motion.
Thank you. Other speakers, Alderman Pearce?
Thank you, Mayor. I actually agree with the other speakers, the last three speakers, because when I read the report, I thought, oh yes, no worries. But then, like Alderman Moulder, when I went round there, I thought, this is totally out of keeping with the area. And I mean, it's funny you think that a fence would cause such angst, but I certainly understand by the height and the colour, as Alderman James has said. I can certainly see why, you know, it'd be difficult for the person that's affected supporting this. So, like others, if it doesn't get up, hopefully a bit of mediation will solve the problem. But, you know, I thought this was going to be an easy one, but I'm afraid no, I cannot support it.
Thank you. Alderman Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just adding to what the previous speakers have said, once you actually view the property itself, I can't possibly understand why that height is necessary, so I won't be supporting it either. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Alderman Walker?
Yes. So, look, I appreciate the representation we received tonight. I think it was done in a measured and reasonable fashion, and it followed up from an email. I think there's the process through planning where people get to make representations. I think points were made, and they're worth reflecting on. Again, I sit as a member, or stand as I speak now as a member of the Planning Authority, and I have to exercise judgment within the parameters of the planning scheme. I can't exercise my personal views or judgments on how I feel about the fence or whether there might have been a better way forward. It does seem like anything could happen, but you know, there's a pretty strong suggestion that this council might be about to refuse this application, and that is fine. We sit as a planning scheme. This is a matter before us with judgment. However, we have to give robust reasons as to why that might occur. And in all seriousness, if this is something that you've been strongly of the view, best practice in planning would be to telegraph that to your colleagues and to perhaps circulate a motion. Perhaps that motion may have informed me of a view to join you in refusing it, but it looks like we're about to hit refusal, and maybe there's a alternate just sitting on someone's desk, but otherwise we might be hitting for a recess as one is hastily drafted, and I don't think that's a great way forward with planning, and isn't necessarily the harbinger of a great start to a mediation process either, but we're about to find out, I guess.
Other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman Newington.
No, well, first of all, I have to agree with Alderman Walker's comments there. I mean, if people were so likely to want to knock this one back, it would have been, you'd think it would be appropriate to come forward with some really good reasons other than what we've heard so far. Look, I mean, one of the biggest issues we face in terms of these sort of developments is the privacy issue. And that's what the proponents are trying to do here. It'd be no different than them putting a shed in the back of their property and having a roof that they had to look at. I mean, I just can't see how, if you have to step through the hoops, deal with the heritage issues in relation to Bellerive. And the thing about Bellerive I'd like to sort of highlight as well is that there is no one standard of dwelling or property or boundary or lot size or design in Bellerive. You know, I think we get caught up at times trying to make out that we are the protectors of everything there. I mean, we are protectors, I suppose, but there is a huge range of building types and lot sizes and things in Bellerive. And I think, you know, while we do have to take into consideration some of the concerns of residents, we also have to comply with what the planning scheme says. And as far as I'm concerned, if this has been through the hoops, the Heritage Commission, the Heritage staff, and the planning staff seem to think that it's okay, and I think we should be actually doing the same thing, or we're going to end up costing the ratepayer a little bit more to deal with this if it goes through to the planning commission. But anyway, I would encourage everyone to think carefully and vote in support.
Thank you. So the motion before the chair is the officer's recommendation for approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The motion is lost. I have no alternative motion. In the absence of an alternative motion, it just defaults to the tribunal at great cost to the council.
No, Mr Mayor.
Do you have an alternative?
I can foreshadow an alternative, but could we defer this for drafting of it? I've written it out and it just needs to be...
I'm happy to defer it. It's clearly the will of council to form a decision on this. I would like to be able to deal with it while we're sitting as a planning authority, so perhaps you're able to work on this rather quickly.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. I would like to see a written alternative motion.
Yeah, we need to
We
talk to
have
you
this
later.
occur on a regular basis where we don't have a written alternative motion.
That point of order is upheld, yes.
Thank you.
That was what the purpose of our discussion was.
Thank you,
I have it written here. I just probably need to get it typed up and circulated.
Okay, if we can get it copied, please, General Manager. But while we're holding off on that particular issue, I'll recall Alderman Blomley, please, and deal with the next item on the agenda. Next item on the agenda is 11.3.2. It's a development application at 37 Vastic Street, Rosny, for an ancillary dwelling and additions. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The alternative motion that's been proposed, and I think it has been that's the original. I thought there may have been a copy of the alternative one on the screen, but it's not. But anyway, nevertheless, Mr Mayor, I seek leave.
Do I have a second, please? Thank you, Alderman Evans.
Thank you, Alderman Evans. Mr Mayor, the matter in relation to 37 Vastic Street and the alternative motion has been circulated, and I move that the matter in relation to 37 Vastic Street, Rosny, ancillary dwelling and additions to dwelling be refused for the following reasons. The proposal does not satisfy clause 10.4.2p2 as the proposed development is not contained within the building envelope and will cause unreasonable loss of amenity to the adjoining properties. There are two properties in particular, 35 and 39 Vastic Street. And this is by the very nature of unreasonable loss of amenity, by the reduction in sunlight entering their habitable room windows along the northern elevation and a significant increase in overshadowing to the private open space of 39 Bastic. Also, the proposal does not satisfy clause 10.4.3p2, which requires dwellings to be provided with an area of private open space, including a space that is not less than 4 metres wide. Despite the number of decks existing and proposed, there are no spaces that meet this particular dimension. The proposal does not satisfy clause 10.4.6p2, that there are 3 decks that form part of the development that are less than 3 metres from the side boundaries. In particular, that particular deck at the rear and is also directly into private open space of 35 Bastic Street. And I might add there's no screening that has been included as one of the conditions in the officer's recommendation. So in actual fact, there's no screening that has been provided in respect of that particular deck that actually abuts onto the private open space of 35 Bastic. It's also considered the proposed ancillary dwelling does not meet the definition provided in the planning scheme. An ancillary dwelling means an additional dwelling that is not greater than 60 square metres in area. On the plans, the proposed ancillary dwelling is connected to the existing dwelling and the floor areas are connected via a hallway, therefore the floor area is greater than 60 square metres. Mr Mayor and fellow councillors, the proposed development will cause unreasonable loss of amenity to the adjoining properties, in particular 35 and 39 Bastic, and by the reduction in sunlight and significant overshadowing of the private open space. I seek councillors' approval.
Thank you. Alderman Edmonds.
Thank you very much. I don't have a hell of a lot to add to the previous speaker or indeed the deputation or indeed the alternative motion. Other than to reflect, I think we talk about how these problems can be avoided from the start, and we've had motions and we've sent things up to high levels to get looked at. My understanding that the side of this property that didn't make a deputation wasn't really fully aware of what was happening, but I just really think a lot of this stuff could be avoided so we don't have the motions that the DAs that come to our council knocked off because conversations weren't had at the start. So my rationale is the vote for refusal is to actually get those conversations to occur because, as we've seen, there's plenty of grounds to refuse, and that's how I'll be voting tonight and encourage others to also.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Ewington.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, when someone decides to renovate their house and do something to it, there's a rule book, and the rule book is the planning scheme. Now, this notion that people have to go and ask approval from their neighbours before they go and do stuff, while in the ideal world might be true, and it might be great to see that happen, but there's no obligation for people to go and, ask for permission to do things like this. And I mean...
Sorry, Mr Mayor, that was definitely not what I said. If we check the tape, I'm assuming I'm being verbal here.
Look, I don't take it as a particular comment from Alderman Ewington directed at you, okay. Alderman Edmonds. I think that there's a thread that's coming in right across in this regard, so I don't see it as a personal threat. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the suggestion that people, can avoid having to go through the angst of going through the planning process and having objections, and they don't have to ask permission. I mean, it takes a lot of work, having gone through the process myself recently, to deal with all of the requirements of the planning scheme. And I mean, you read through the report here tonight, and I mean, this shading of properties. I mean, in an urban area where people are building, to expect that we can have no shading whatsoever, and that's why the planning scheme allows a certain amount of shading and puts restrictions on it. To expect that can never happen, I mean, it's just fantasy land. And I mean, and then also when it comes to the private open space, I mean, you look at the topography of this land and modern design principles and the way that we live these days. I mean, people like decks and they like entertaining off the side of their house, and if that's the way they come up with their public open space, and that's probably an example where the planning scheme may or may not have been able to keep up with modern design principles. But to suggest that someone who decides to have that as their public open space, not a piece of grass out the back of their house, is hardly a reason to want to knock this back. You know, if you look about, viewing from decks into houses, around the city, I mean, you could drive down any street and see situations where people are sitting on a deck looking into someone else's backyard. So, once again, it's an urban environment where you're going to have a certain amount of privacy issues. People do the best they can to comply with what the scheme says. Under the circumstances, if you read through the report, the proponents have gone through that process and, done their best to try and make it as to comply, essentially, which is what we're talking about here. It's an older house that wants to, improve and update their house, and obviously for whatever reasons, whether they're expanding their family or whatever, but, people have a right to do that sort of thing too. And I think while it's important that the community does have a say, ultimately it comes down to one basic principle, which is the rule book that we all have to comply with, and as Alderman Walker said in the last case that we had here, it's important that we stick with that. And we actually, vote on these things as a planning authority and take some of the emotion out of it. And sometimes it is difficult when fear of the unknown when people go to build. But I think the important thing for us is to stick with what the scheme says and with the advice of the staff, and to approve this one. So I'll certainly be foreshadowing that I'll be moving the motion to approve if this alternative motion doesn't get up.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, there is a rule book, and the rule book says there shouldn't be overshadowing or overlooking of private open spaces. And this clearly does that. I was at the property yesterday. I stood close to the backyard and could see where there was going to be direct overlooking with no screening. So that doesn't apply. That doesn't comply with the rule book. Also, the rule book says that we should have a certain setbacks from the side. That clearly isn't the case here, and I'm struggling with this a little bit, because the reason for saying it's okay not to comply with that particular part of the rule book was that there are other properties in the area that are similar with smaller setbacks. Now, this is an area that I guess the majority of these houses would have been built in the 1950s, 60s, weatherboard, and this planning scheme didn't apply then. This planning scheme does apply now. So are we saying that because houses were built under different conditions that we should apply that? Because, there's one particular rule that I was very fond of, which was something like no more than 7 dwellings in a certain amount of space, yes. But we don't say, oh, well, that's how that was done, so we don't have to do that, and we should comply with that. We comply with the current rule book. The rule book says the setback has to be much further away from the side boundary. So I can't support this. And I'm sorry, I shall be supporting the alternate motion.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. All the talk about setbacks and things like that, I believe that's all covered with the building envelope provisions. And I'd just like to draw Alderman's attention to one of the documents on there, which is the sketches from the north. It's not numbered, so I can't tell you, but just the information of everyone, that particular sketch there shows a portion on the left-hand sketch at the top of the wall which is outside the permitted building envelope. So all the things about overshadowing and bits and pieces really relate to, I think, that particular section of the wall. Could I just have some confirmation from the General Manager of Planning, through you, of course, Mr Mayor, in relation to, is that the only position where it doesn't fall within the building envelope?
Mr Lovell.
Through Mr Mayor, excuse me. Yes, there's 2 small sections at the upper side of the building, and they're shown in the attachments. There's a red line showing the proportion of the building that includes the building envelope. So the pages are unnumbered, but if you look for it's the page before the one you had out showing the photographs.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
So, excuse me, Alderman Mulder, they're elevations of the building. few pages before the photo that you showed us.
Having taken the photo out, Mr. Lovell, I don't know where it was. I think that this is such a minor thing that if the building had been, built totally within the building envelope, the impact wouldn't have been that much greater, I don't think. It would have been that much lesser had if the building had been built within the building envelope, entirely within the building envelope, I don't think there would have still been the amount of overshadowing and overlooking that would have occurred. And if I'm not mistaken, it would have actually been it would have met all the acceptable solutions and would therefore have been passed by delegation, as I can see it. So I'm thinking that when we talk about these things, the performance criteria is said unreasonable, and it's not. And I think that the greater loss of amenity, is not unreasonable, given the amount that would have occurred had it been fully complying. So I think that's the point that we need to sort of get through with this. That the only way we're going to avoid an impact on the amenity is not to build it at all. That would be my concern. So, depending on what other points my colleagues care to raise, I won't be supporting this alternative either.
Thank you. Other speakers? I'll reply, Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And on page 58, it does say that the clause 10.4.2, setbacks in the building envelope for all dwellings, does not comply with that acceptable solution, as a portion of the northern dining room wall extends outside the prescribed side boundary building envelope. And therefore, when you look at performance criteria, then you need to assess it as to whether or not there's reasonable or unreasonable loss of amenity in relation to that particular impact on the adjoining properties. What you have here, in summary, Mr Mayor, you have an extension that's obviously to the front of the existing building, and you have another one that's actually joined to the rear of it. And so, in other words, it should be regarded as an extension of an ancillary dwelling. So you've got the bulk and scale of this huge wall from one end to where the ancillary dwelling has been proposed, to the extension onto the front of the property, of which the carport and will be provided for a vehicle, and there'd be extension and development over. So you've got this huge wall that actually extends continuously along that boundary, and also too, you don't have any screening on that particular extension that abuts the 35 Bastic Street. And one of the conditions that we've always had in any of these developments is, in fact, to have screening to a certain height on all decks. And this hasn't occurred in relation to this. It does not satisfy those conditions in particular. If this was permitted, then we wouldn't be dealing with it in this place. And under the planning scheme, if the council needs to exercise its discretion, it can do so, but it needs to make sure that these particular conditions that we apply do not cause unreasonable loss of amenity or overshadowing onto adjoining properties. I seek council's support.
Thank you. So the motion before the chair is an alternative motion for refusal. All those in favour? Against? The motion is lost. I think Alderman Ewington, you foreshadowed the officer's recommendation. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Alderman Blomley. Alderman...
No, only as per officer's recommendation, Mr Mayor. I think we've all had our 2 bobs worth here. Encourage everyone to support this one.
Alderman, other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Yes, I have my first bob's worth. Look, and I will refer to some of the previous debate. I did note some of the comments from Alderman Warren, Your Worship, around, I guess, the rule book. And I can say that I gaze wistfully at the Clarence City Council 2007 planning scheme. What a glorious bureaucratic creation. That thick, unambiguous, and much more straightforward for residents and developers. People knew what the rules were and how they stood. Current system is almost like two sets of rule books. If it doesn't meet rule book 1, then you get to use rule book 2. It's like the TCE from my memory of how that works as well. I did visit the sites from the outside, and I did visit the representatives' dwelling as well. And there is an impact, and I understand why that wouldn't be considered desirable. But again, I have to look at this through the planning prism, and I gave it some thought around the gravity and scale around refusal, and I just didn't see the grounds there. So sometimes you look at this, and I am someone that lives on a slope. You live on a slope, often that means that there's going to be, a degree of privacy not attainable if you were living on the flat. So I did wonder whether there were some things that could be done around sort of some privacy. I guess the problem is that in other situations we can, and the officers often do, look for sort of design features around using translucent glass, or sometimes when it comes to decks, just an increased level of, if you like, fencing to achieve those outlines. And that is something that I thought might be the way through. But when I started revisiting these elements, the places where you might try and apply them, they're already actually the compliant elements. It's not, from what I could see, something that we could condition to something that's already acceptable. So whilst that is something I would be looking to do in this instance, that I don't see that avenue there for me to add those extra levels of comfort to the representative tonight, and that's somewhat unfortunate, but it's the reality with which things sit. So again, I sit as a member of the planning authority, and I have to make decisions under the restraints of that, and there's a need for that for things to be orderly. I again say that if you're going to do a planning scheme, put the dial the DeLorean back to 2007 and start using that planning scheme, but that's not the situation we're in. So I will be voting in favour as per the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman Ewing. So the motion before the Chair is the officer's recommendation for approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Take on 11.3.3 now, and then I'll come back to 11.3.1. So 11.3.3 is a development application for 9 Ambleside Crescent Lindisfarne for a single dwelling. It is a consent agreement, I might add. Thanks very much. Alderman Ewington and Alderman Kennedy seconded. Thank you. Alderman Ewington.
Oh, no, it just seems like this one's been negotiated out to a good outcome all round, so I encourage everyone to support this one.
Thank you. Alderman Kennedy.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Other speakers? Alderman Edmonds.
No, sorry, I was just putting
Getting a bit touchy here. Okay, in that case, look, I'll put the motion that we authorise the GM to sign the consent agreement. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. And we need to deal with 11.3.1 again. Thanks, Alderman Bromley. Okay, 11.3.1 again. We have an alternative motion circulated by Alderman Mulder. Before proceeding, could I point out that any alternative decision by Council will require a full statement of the reasons in order to maintain the integrity of the scheme. I'm happy for us to take from the recording of this meeting the comments that you make in that regard, and they will be recorded as the reasons why we're making an alternative decision. Do I have a seconder, please? Thanks, Alderman Evans. Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The development, the motion that has been circulated to members now, the alternative motion that the development application for fencing at 24 Victoria Esplanade, Bellarive, and the planning reference there is there, be refused for the following reasons. 10.4.2, that's a typo, that should read PC3, Performance Criteria 3, in that the excessive bulk and scale and proportions when viewed from the adjacent lot doesn't meet those criteria. And E13, the Historic Heritage Code, as we've heard tonight, the colour schemes are not compatible with that heritage code. Mr Mayor, the reasons for the refusal all relate really to the height of the fence and the colour schemes that have been, and that has been well debated, and I believe they're actually captured in broad terms in the motion itself as the legitimate reasons. But just to go through them, I think we had the debate in the previous meeting, and there's plenty of reasons there that people around this table gave for their thing. And another thing that needs to be taken is that with those minor modifications, the rest of the officer's report is a comprehensive explanation and assessment of a thing. And this motion is just one which says the officer's assessment of those two particular criteria under the planning scheme. We've got a different subjective view to that arrived at by the officers. So that's the purpose of it. In regards to the costs that come with these sorts of things with council, if the appeal is done and there's a mediation, I believe the costs are normally shared between the parties. So it's not like there's a huge cost involved, and either party has the right to hold to do a statutory appeal in any event. So they have statutory right to appeal in any event. Where the costs come in is where council is unable to make a decision, where we keep going 6-6. So, but I don't know how we can go 6-6 when there's 11 of us in the room, which sort of makes it a bit odd. So there we'll go. So I don't think I need to say much more. We've had a reasonable debate, and I think the reasons are there that the refusal is for admittedly minor matters, but they're minor in the sense of the planning scheme. They're certainly not minor in the eyes of the people who have made the deputations to us this evening. So I'd commend this particular motion.
Thank you. Alderman Edmonds. Other speakers? Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, in fact, these particular matters are quite major in their distinction in relation to why we have this refusal motion before us. And I refer to Council Officer's report on page 43, and I just want to quote this particular section under E13 8.2, and it says under P5C, it must not visually dominate an existing heritage place or street in terms of size, height and bulk when viewed from the street frontage or frontages. Isn't that clear? That is really clear in this particular case because of the nature and relationship with regard to the heritage place. And that is, and I mentioned that earlier in debate, as you may all be aware. And in the actual officer's comments, and I quote, the scale, colour and form of this proposal are considered to have a minimal impact upon the heritage value of the place. Now, that is basically an understatement in the sense that this is having a major impact upon the actual property and the adjoining properties in relation to this. So I have no compunction, Mr Mayor, to support this, but on the basis that it has a huge ramifications on the impact of what this particular proposal entails. I will be supporting this particular refusal motion.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Newington.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr Mayor. Well, I just want to... I'll make this brief, but the report here is quite clear in relation to the assessment of the whole project. I mean, basically we're talking about a 1,441 square metre property with probably a 450 square metre house, and then saying that if this was a standard building block, you could probably say it is excessive bulk and scale. But I think we're forgetting that we're not taking that into account here in this situation. You know, when you've got a house that's got a 45 metre frontage on one road frontage, I think the other one was about 30 odd metres, and you look at what the heritage consultants have said here, you know, this Heritage Advisory considers this proposal to be unambiguously modern whilst maintaining clear and visual separation from the existing heritage forms. You know, you don't always have to build everything. As I said, in Bellerive there's a lot of different new buildings, older buildings, and a mixture of architectural types. You know, this proposal appears to be compatible to the principal heritage-built forms upon the subject site and within the broader precinct by virtue of its simplistic and subservient design. Colour has been addressed and is discussed above as being white as part of the recommended condition. So, you know, the scale, colour and form of this proposal are considered to have minimal impact upon the heritage values of the place. And then when you take into account the size of the block, the size of the house, the street frontage, you know, I certainly don't agree with the interpretation of scale and bulk being excessive. But anyway, we'll see how it goes, but I encourage everyone to vote this one down, and if it goes back to 5 all, well then it'll be up to the council staff to make a decision. It can't be 5 can it? Someone can start.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, at the beginning of each land use planning item, there's a heading legislative requirements. And under that, it actually states the report on this item details the basis and reasons for the recommendation. Any alternative decision by council will require a full statement of reasons in order to maintain the integrity of the planning approval process and to comply with the requirements of the Judicial Review Act and the Local Government Meeting Procedures Regulations 2015. I have to say that this alternative motion, which has 2 lines, 2 dot point lines, as far as I'm concerned, as compared to a 12-page report from the officers, does not actually meet the requirements as far as that aspect of a planning matter. And I realise that the Mayor has actually said that the reasons will be determined by listening back to Alderman Moulder's, in particular, discussion on this. However, I don't believe that is appropriate. I feel that we actually need to maintain standards. And to me, the standard is that if you are going to put forward an alternative motion to an officer's recommendation and report that has been thoroughly done, then there needs to be some substance. And as far as I'm concerned, this does not meet my test, and I don't believe it actually meets the legislative requirements test. Thank you. I won't be supporting it.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Walker?
Yes, again, I won't rehash the points made previously. I do wonder sometimes whether there's a telegraphing of false hope potentially in the way that alternates are sometimes drafted. I do wonder whether we're going to get some clarity around this, and maybe that's the thing that I'll take out of it as a positive. Again, Alderman Bomberto, Your Worship, has mentioned the scantness of the rationale, and again, I don't know that it's going to be perceived as being particularly strong should it need to be defended. But you know, we come into this, we take different perspectives. It is a matter before us to consider, so I acknowledge that, but still think, irrespective of my own personal views about whether it's something that should be there or not, because they're things we can't take into account, I feel that we're still obliged to follow the original recommendation as per the officers, so I won't be supporting this alternative.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right, reply. Sorry, Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, if you thought I was coming into this council meeting to argue about a fence because I thought I'd probably be one of the only ones that didn't like the officer's recommendation. Otherwise, we probably could have had time to draw up a refusal if I'd known that people felt the same way as I did. And I didn't feel that way when I read the report. I thought I'd support it. But when I went round there and had a look at it, I thought, geez, the bulk and scale of this, and I'm honestly disappointed where it is to see something like this. Now, you know, I wish, and Alderman Ewington alluded to it earlier, I wish that people could have got together and sorted something out. We've been saying that for, 20-odd years now, so it doesn't always happen. And they, as Alderman Ewington said, they don't have to. So that's fine. But look, once I saw it and went round there, I thought, geez, I'm not happy with that. When I read the officer's report, I thought, yeah, fine. But when you go around, and that's what we get paid to do, we get paid to go around and have a look at these things. And that's why I'm supporting this alternative motion tonight, Mayor, because I'm afraid I didn't like what I saw.
Alderman Edmonds.
I'd just like to say amen. That's exactly...
Sorry, you've already spoken as seconder.
Oh, I did too.
It's a good try. Well done. Listen, Kevin, watch this. I've done it before.
Double dipping.
Are there any other speakers? Right reply, Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I mean, I'm not quite sure what you expect in terms of lengthy reports to be completely rewritten in the space of a few minutes, as the desire is to get this matter dealt with, and it can't be referred to the next meeting. Mr Mayor, let's just be absolutely clear that the 2 points that I have placed as the alternative motion are the 2 points that I believe are salient as to if these were corrected, and we're not in a position to correct the development application, but were these to be corrected by some way or form, then the bulk of it will go through. Like Alderman Edmonds, in his attempt to speak twice to this subject, I was reluctant to second the motion, if you recall, because I thought there wasn't much appetite for a refusal. So I haven't gone through the lengthy processes. But we are where we are, and no one should predict the outcome of a council meeting, and we're not allowed to predict the outcome of a council meeting. So, you know, it's on the hop. They are, as I pointed out, 2 fairly minor points, although others may disagree with my definition of minor, but they are, in terms of the planning scheme, quite minor points. Now, let me just say it again for the record, and this is a matter of public record. This is being live streamed, and it's, you know, and the words will be there. The officer's report, with the necessary modifications of the assessment of the above 2 criteria that I have mentioned, are the reasons, the full statement reasons for this particular thing. Now, I can't do much more than that, given the circumstances into which I find myself. So all I can say is that I commend this particular motion to the council.
Thank you. So the motion before the chair is for refusal. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. That concludes our business as a planning authority. If we could recall Alderman Mulder, Alderman, please. That was a bit of a Freudian slip. Moving on to asset management, 11.5.1, proposed purchase of LED street lighting within the distribution network of Clarence that we authorise the GM to negotiate with Tas Networks. Thanks, Alderman James. Second, Alderman Ewington. Thank you. Alderman James.
Yes, look, Mr Mayor, this has been a wonderful endeavour on behalf of Council and in conjunction with Tas Networks. And I might add that the Council a couple of years ago designated part of Gilston Bay, Fairfield Street as an introduction to the LED light on the corners in particular places. And that was canvassed by a number of the residents in that particular area, and it went down extremely well as far as their response was concerned. And this is an extension of it, to basically take it on board, to actually have LED light on most of our streets, etc. and so on. And you've got to remember that within the general rate, there is a fee that all of the ratepayers and anybody else that may be venturing into the city of Clarence have to pay. Well, they may use the facilities, and it's the ratepayers that actually pay the bills for street lighting on council roads within the city. So by the very nature of this being extended, and I think it's going to have a really positive outcome in relation to the city of Clarence, is that there will be perhaps a decrease, and I think Mr Graham would in fact be able to confirm that in relation to the installation of these LED lights as they progress, or the installation of same occur within the city. This is a great move forward by Clarence, Mr Mayor, it really is, and I think that these are the sort of things that we ought to be up there and shouting from the rooftops in relation to what the City of Clarence does in relation to these sorts of things. And I seek council support.
Thank you.
Oh, look, only just say that, notwithstanding how it happens that we're in this position where we've got to go back and buy ones after we've been originally negotiated it all and had a plan, but anything that can save the ratepayer money and reduce our maintenance costs and ongoing operational costs is something we should be signing off on pretty quickly. So I'd encourage everyone to support this because of the obvious cost savings that entail.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Look, there is a cost saving, that's why we're doing it, but if you look through the report, the cost saving should be a little bit higher. The recommendation authorises the General Manager to enter into negotiations with Tas Networks. Tas Networks is one of the three entities that was created when the Hydroelectric Commission was broken up, along with Aurora and Hydro. Tas Networks, I would say a couple of points about them. I think that the work that their frontlinesmen do in dealing with managing infrastructure, dealing with circumstances of blackouts, is fantastic. They're often doing it in the most challenging situation with wind and rain, and I praise and give thanks to them on the record, as I do to the backroom boffins that are managing the loads, etc., so that there aren't brownouts. I'm not going to say the same for the managerial class. Quite frankly, I think that the vestige of HGC imperialism died at Hydro and died at Aurora and continues at Tas Networks. That said, this is something that's giving us a cost saving, so we get to negotiate. There might be a gun to our head in how it's happening, but there's no point not going ahead with this because there is an economic and environmental benefit in doing so. But you know, you wonder about trade practices concerns in some of these situations.
Thank you. Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just paused for a moment to imagine Clarence with a LED light on every single street corner, but I realise that Alderman James did in fact mean LED lights, which are nowhere near as but do have a great environmental impact, so I will be supporting this.
Thank you for that correction. My apologies.
Okay, if there are no other speakers, right or reply, put the motion that we authorise the GM to negotiate. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Moving on to governance.
Yep.
I haven't. We've got a supplementary land supply analysis relating to review of urban growth boundary at 52 Richardson's Road. I'm going to give it to Alderman Edmonds, I think, was just ahead. Alderman Edmonds.
Your eyes are still doing good work.
Do I have a seconder?
Oh, I haven't actually moved.
Yes, we want to know what he's going to move.
Based on the feedback in our deputations, I move that we properly workshop this and bring it back to a council meeting in 3 weeks.
So a procedural motion that we defer the matter for a further workshop. Do I have a seconder for that procedural motion? Thanks, Alderman Kennedy. I will put that procedural motion. All those in favour? Against? The motion is lost, I think. I think there was was there somebody abstain on that? I think
We have a show of hands.
Yeah.
We just saw it.
Look, I'm going to recommit that vote. All those in favour of deferring it to workshop? 1, 2, 3, 4. Against? Yeah, the motion is lost if you take into account the people who abstain from the vote. Okay,
just for clarity, you would have needed 7, wouldn't it, as a procedural as well?
You need 7 for a procedural. Alderman von Berto. Sorry? I call on Alderman von Berto, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wish to move the officer's recommendation.
Do I have a seconder for the officer's recommendation, please? Alderman Newington, thank you. Alderman von Berto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As all of the people around the table would know, when this matter came to us on the 9th of February of this year, I actually put the officer's recommendation, and I'll just remind everybody what the officer's recommendation was, that Council resolves to advise the applicant that the proposal is premature and Council does not support an extension of the urban growth boundary to include land at 52 Richardson's Road, Sandford, for the following reasons. The proposal will exacerbate impacts of sprawl and compound costs associated with infrastructure and service provision, which will in the long term be subsidised by the broader community. The proposal is inconsistent with the Minister's proposed amendment to Strauss and associated roadmap to a full review of Strauss. The proposal would adversely impact on the Greater Hobart settlement strategy, and the increased traffic load on Bayview Road would adversely impact residential amenity for those residents. And then it goes on to part 2, which I won't read. As I said, I put the motion and it was seconded by Alderman James, but it was lost. And then an alternative motion was put by Alderman Newington. That is the beginning of this particular matter. As you all would know, when it got to the 1st of March, I actually put a motion of rescission, which was not supported. Then on the 22nd of March, I actually put forward a motion to have a policy position in relation to these types of matters. Albeit, the policy position was that when the matter first came to us, rather than, as with this one, it is coming back to us. I can understand why we have had a deputation tonight, and we have had a number of residents contact us via email suggesting that we should actually look at option 4, which the officers have put forward. There are 4 options, and this is obviously the last one, which is not to progress. And that actually would be that we receive the response provided by JMG and resolve that the response does not satisfy the Rules 1 requirements and not respond to the Minister. I don't think that's our role. This has started. We have a policy position in relation to these types of matters actually going out to public consultation. The situation is that the officers, in a very lengthy report, have determined that JMG's response does not cover all of the matters that have been requested by the Minister in this particular policy planning unit information sheet. So I believe that we actually need to go to option 3, which is what the officers are recommending, and that's to receive the response provided by JMG, provide each of the Southern Councils with a copy of the proposal and all the associated supporting information, and request them to provide feedback to Council. Take opportunity to undertake public exhibition concurrently with the referral to the Southern Councils for 5 weeks, and then for us to consider a subsequent report from the officers identifying any issues raised during the exhibition and referrals before resolving how to advise the Minister of the Council's position. We need to provide as much evidence to the Minister as possible so that he can make a considered decision. And that is why I believe we should support the officer's recommendation for option 3. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Ewington.
It's interesting that we've got gone full circle here. So, and come back to this one here. I mean, obviously, I put the motion forward for a couple of different reasons. One, that that area is a nice area, and I'm sure plenty of people want to live there. The people that are there enjoy it, and the opportunity for other people to have a chance to live there. Plus, the main reason was to deal with some of the obvious issues that some of the objectors bring up in relation to, transport issues, school issues, and those sort of things. I mean, and this does force the government, and as Alderman Von Berde quite correctly said there, I mean, this is a commission role and more of a state government role to deal with some of those larger infrastructure issues in relation to transport, roads, and schools to a certain extent. But at the same time too, I think it's important that we've made a decision to at least go down this path. We had a majority that agreed to at least look at this. A lot of us, are concerned about housing affordability and housing availability, and we know that that's something that we should be supportive of, making it easier for people to do stuff. And I personally saw the proposal, providing a fair bit of public open space. That at the moment it's private land, but it's going to be transferred across to council to create public open space for the Lordale and Sanford community as a positive. And at the time, I knew there was always going to be plenty of opportunity for community consultation. I'm certainly supportive of that happening. But like I said, we need to provide some certainty for the proponents and developers of these sorts of things. And they've done what we asked them to do. They've come back. It might not have every T crossed and I dotted, but they've done what they need to do. And I mean, at least with a bit more community consultation, hopefully, some things will be dealt with. But the reality is, there's not going to be, community consultation. I've said a few times in meetings and probably in the chamber as well, is that sometimes community consultation, we have this belief that we're always going to get to the point where everyone agrees. But I certainly think in this situation we're not going to get to the point where everyone agrees, but at least we're going down that path of making it open. And I know that as a council we are very open and community consultation orientated with everything that we do. So I think that this option is a great way forward. And I mean, I only received 2 emails today about this, so I'd hardly say that's a groundswell of community opposition. And you're always going to have people that are against stuff making the most noise, and I think dealing with some of the traffic issues and giving the community a chance to have a say, and that's where it's up to the developers now to really be proactive and try and sell it a little bit better, and hopefully they can do that. And then ultimately it's going to be up to the Planning Commission and the state government to deal with some of the things that are raised. So I'd encourage my colleagues to support this one. Give the community a chance to have their say, give the developers a chance to put something forward. But as we know with a lot of these things, the cart before the horse, sometimes it's really difficult for them to answer all the questions until they know a little bit. But to give them some surety to know that we're actually prepared to look at it so they can concentrate on doing the work they need to do, rather than be left in limbo second-guessing us. And I think that's something that we've got to avoid at all costs in these situations where we're placed in a situation. We've got to, provide some guidance to the community about where we stand on things. So we've already agreed to it, and as Alderman Von Berde suggested, she's happy to see this consultation added to the whole picture, and I think that's a good thing, and I'd encourage everyone to support this recommendation today.
Thank you. Other speakers, Alderman, James first, and then Warren, and then Edmonds.
Well, it's very kind, thank you. I was going to bow down to Alderman Warren because he seemed to have a hand up. Look, it's interesting to note the sort of change of tactics here in relation to option 3 that's been proposed by one of my colleagues, because of the fact that if option 3 does get up, then it's going to send a signal to the community that in fact council would like to see this progress. It would like to have the other councils having some input into it, and also to signal to the community that the council is willing or is going to take the opportunity to undertake public exhibition concurrently with the referral to southern councils. So doesn't that flag some indication to the people who are opposed to anything happening in relation to extension of the urban growth boundary that council is doing something completely different to what their wishes were, and even to the extent to which the speaker at the early part of the meeting made comment in which she said that the community, and there was an overwhelming support in the community for option 4. Option 4 is in fact to resolve that the response does not satisfy the RLUCI requirements and not respond to the minister. Now, are we listening to the community on this or not? By the very nature of us proceeding to take on board option 3, then it's by the very nature of referral, exhibition and report. So the community are basically not going to be provided with what I think is an outstanding viewpoint from the members of that particular community, that they are not in support of this development, and therefore they do not see the need for an extension of the urban growth boundary, and also too they believe that's going to put extra pressure on services to be able to provide this if and when it ever happens, and therefore it's going to have to be met by the community or by another government agency if they have the funds to be able to continue to pursue this. I will not be supporting this, because I supported the second of the motion in relation to what we discussed this before, and I did it on the basis that I felt that the community were not in favour of this. I got myself into a little bit of spot of trouble too, I might add, by the very nature of making some comments on Compton's program and on the other lady's program that afternoon. But nevertheless, that's past tense, and I made my apologies and so on and so forth. The simple fact of the matter is that was a matter of debate at the time. The officers put up a proposal, and this council decided that it would not support that recommendation, and they were valid reasons why the officers put that proposal to council at that time, and I still believe they are quite appropriate, and they are what the feeling the community has in relation to that. Having said that, I don't think we should be sending any signals at all to the community in relation to this, and therefore I will not be supporting option 3.
Thank you. Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to thank Alderman von Berto for moving this motion and for explaining the reasons behind her preference for option 3, and that does give me some comfort. I also voted to support the officer's original motion to refuse the request to extend the urban growth boundary. I also believed it to be premature. Whenever we have a debate like this, we get tied up in discussions about housing affordability and availability. And so I'll remind people again that we do have 3,000 vacant blocks in Clarence. There's no shortage of land. There may be a shortage of willing developers to make that land available. But there's no need to keep pushing the boundaries out when we have that availability of land. And also we frequently hear in this chamber a desire to increase densification in near infrastructure. So it does seem premature to increase the urban growth boundary. I also have a different recollection to some of my colleagues from the response that we received from the Minister, which some took to be a green light. I've written a lot of ministerial responses in my time on behalf of a minister, and I understood it to mean this is unlikely to succeed. And you can try if you want to, but it seems like an awful lot of effort to go to when it may not succeed. And I noticed that the deputation tonight mentioned 2 other similar council proposals that had been accepted by the Minister. I don't believe they were similar. Those were ones that came to us for discussion. And I think they were smaller parcels of land that were within, or they were sort of inconsistent. They were sort of partly within the urban growth boundary, or there was sort of a gap where it seemed obvious to join it up. So this is a different case. So while I would prefer the review to wait until it becomes part of the whole review, and then we can take into account the availability of land in Clarence and the suitability for development, and whether we really need a whole lot of additional blocks. Looking at the long term, I do think this is a positive development, and I believe that some of those issues can be resolved, but I don't think there's justification for fast-tracking it. So I agree with Alderman von Berto that the more information that we can collect at this stage, and giving the opportunity to the community to voice their concerns, and that can all go to the Minister to aid him in his decision making, seems to be the best way forward since this process has started, and it would seem premature to stop it without actually taking any further action. And I appreciate that the developer has been going to a lot of effort to try and take the community along with them. But I will be supporting option C, option 3, I believe, the recommendation in this motion.
Thank you, Alderman Warren. Alderman Edmonds.
Thank you very much. Yes, we all have different ways of categorising that Minister's response. I certainly won't repeat mine tonight. I didn't actually come here tonight wanting to talk about the UGB and these sort of issues. Ideologically, I'm not necessarily opposed to option 3, but what I've heard from the key stakeholders is option 1 and option 4. And then we've got option 3 as our recommendation. Now, we make some pretty small decisions at this council after multiple workshops. I don't think we've made one like this big without even workshopping the topic to even get a sense of where people are at. I just think there's more. I really wish we could have deferred this, because it's not squibbing a decision. I think we've all laid our cards on the table in terms of where we sit on this project. But wouldn't it have been nicer to sort of work together and see if we could all get on the same page? You know, it's sort of, we've got 4 options in a report we haven't talked about together. It's like a choose-your-own-adventure novel where we're supposed to get a unanimous outcome from the 12 of us, and perhaps we will around option 3. You know, the reasons put forward tonight might be fine, and that's great, but I tell you, I'd rather have taken more time. There's no ticking clock on this one, having checked that before the meeting. This is a really important decision and should be done right, and it should be done in conjunction with our stakeholders. Instead, we've got people saying, don't do another thing, and we've got people saying, I prefer you did it the other way. And to option 1, they talk about Hobart and Brighton. We did ourselves in Mornington following the process. We heard tonight there was a commitment to consult, which has already been shown. We also saw a commitment to engage the community and talk about the petition, etc. So that's all fine and good. I just would have preferred more time to chat around the table to get to a better position, because the way these agendas come out is that it's Thursday morning, might come online around lunchtime. We've got Friday, then there's a weekend where people, you know, aren't in their professional space, and then it's Monday, and all the deputations on this topic to me came today. So you talk about, you know, I just don't feel like we're here with as much as we could, and that's why I wouldn't have minded the extra rotation of council meetings. However, we are where we are. I'm not sure anyone's going to be happy with this vote. I just think it's a bit of a mess, and if this doesn't get up, I'll foreshadow deferral again.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Yeah, look, I don't know how the foreshadow hierarchy works, because if this doesn't get up, I was going to foreshadow option 4. And I still probably will. We might be here all night. And I do that because I remain consistent the whole way through. And no information that's come to me has changed my point of view around this. And let's go to a couple of things. I'm going to be brief in my usual disparagement of STCA and all their efforts to get the mediocre UGB that we ended up with in 2011, which was sort of redundant from the start. And I won't sort of go on again about the fact that, you know, how we do actually need to go through a phase and things do need to be expanded, but they need to be done right. They really do. I think that when it came to considering the minor expansion on the corner of Pass Road, it might have been an 11-12 vote. Now, I think an alderman, if there's an alderman that thinks that's wrong, they might wish to get up and put a matter of clarification. But I think that 11-1, yeah, so there you go. Getting a bit optimistic on the count, so I'm glad that was clarified. 11-1.
Let's focus.
But the point of that matter is that that was straightforward. That was, I think, what this mechanism that has sort of evolved through the ministerial and the planning unit is there to address these sort of smaller situations rather than huge, bigger picture changes that could be quite complex in nature, and that's something that troubles me. So I can appreciate some frustration on behalf of the applicant because of how things have gone along. But I sit here with the circumstances up to date, and my views haven't changed on the matter. So I think it would be the most straightforward thing. And if you look at option 4, we received the response. That's part of all of them. But the second bit is that resolve the response doesn't satisfy the RLUS1 requirements. Yep. Because it doesn't. It doesn't. So that's where I sit on things. Just through you to the head of planning, if you wouldn't mind, Your Worship. As things currently stand, can you give me some comfort that if this progresses, say, through option 1, if we end up there, because we could go anywhere at the moment, that there's nothing within this development or infrastructure requirements that could potentially lead to compulsory acquisition of land?
Mr Mayor, I'm not quite sure I understand the question and the relationship to acquisition.
Look, I'm just trying to, I guess, throw things out there as much as we're trying to move things ahead.
It sounds like you're fishing all
yes,
the
I don't think I'm fishing. I'm showing that the pond is not transparent. The pond hasn't been clarified. So on that note, I make the point again that 10.4 would be the best way forward, as suggested.
Thank you. Alderman Bromley, I think, or Alderman Mulder? Alderman Mulder.
I'd like to commend Alderman von Berto for moving option 3 and not option 4. And there's been some debate here about the pros and cons of the development. That's not what we're here to discuss. We seem to be in almost furious agreement that the appropriate step that's recommended in option 3 is an appropriate step. That doesn't mean that we're in furious agreement over the desired outcome, because that's quite clearly not the case at all. But I think we're in a position now where we have come to this point. We have debated motions about how these matters should be consulted with the community before they come forward, and although this is now going out for consultation, I don't believe it's appropriate to let it hang. I don't believe it's appropriate to just stop it, and although the officers are of the opinion that some of the requirements haven't been met, there's a period there for the proponent to maybe gestate on some of those issues that have been raised, and there's a period here for them to be fixed. On the question of demand, though, on the urban demand, I accept the fact that there are some 3,000 lots available, and it's the demand analysis that we're talking about now, that although those lots are available, we have this problem with the land banking. They may be technically available in some future urban growth boundary, but if they're not being developed, if there's land banking going on, then that's not meeting the requirements, and that's not doing it, and that may be a major effort. But these are matters, of course, that the Minister has chosen to take to himself rather than to allow me to postulate on too much further. But look, I don't think we've got too much choice. Either we send it to a workshop so we get our heads about what is really involved in this, or we move on with option 3, which is going out to consultation with what the officers have got together, with the shortcomings or otherwise of the report, of the demand analysis and the report, and then we have a chance to have a real good look at what those things come back with before we take the next steps. And for the record, I think this is an appropriate development.
Thank you. Alderman Bromley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And Mr Mayor, My views on the urban growth boundary are well known. They've often been, I have on many occasions voiced them in this chamber, so I won't take up our valuable time now by going into those views any further, except to say that, like Alderman Ewington, I also received 2 emails today. I just checked my emails then, in opposition to or suggesting opt for option 4. We had 2 excellent deputations tonight, one for by the proponent, one against. Both of them excellent. And I'm a little bit confused by some of the contributions tonight, Mr Mayor, because to me, option 3 is the most appropriate option. It is the most appropriate option because I can't rely on 2 emails and 2 excellent deputations, one for, one against. With this option 3 allows the opportunity to undertake the public consultation, noting the proponents are already advertised, as I said today, in the Eastern Shore Sun, and the website's up and running, and that's great. They're being proactive, as they ought to be. But option 3, of course, provides an opportunity for that public exhibition of what's being proposed here, and of course feedback will be gained from that. That feedback from a wider cross-section of the community than the 2 people that emailed me today, to then go in a report. So we are as well briefed as possible. And once we've got that report, maybe then it's appropriate time, armed with that information, to then go into a workshop situation. That's the appropriate course of action. And Mr Mayor, I am getting a little bit concerned, and along with you and Alderman Newington and Alderman Womberto, earlier today I was at the launch of Eastern Shore Business, and a businessman there expressed to me the concern that he had about this council being seen to flip-flop all over the place. A decision was made back in February of this year. It subsequently come back into this place. This is the appropriate course of action, and that is option 3. Referral, exhibition and report. And we do that, we engage professionally with our community before we then go back, or before we make a decision on how we advise the minister. And again, it's only advice from us. At the end of the day, as colleagues have touched on, it's the minister's decision at the end of the day. And I take Alderman Warren's view about the correspondence that we all saw, and I had a similar reading, interpretation of that letter. So, and that's not to want to misrepresent or represent the minister's position on this in any way, shape or form. But this is the correct process, this is the fair process, and Mr Mayor, option 3 is the only way forward.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Like Alderman Edmonds, I would have liked to have just discussed this a bit further, but look, if we've got to make a decision tonight, I think that Alderman Womberto's motion is the right way to go. It does give us a chance for feedback, it does put it out there, and that's what we want. I mean, you know, we can talk about this forever. You know, not to progress. I mean, you know, that was one option, but you know, respond to the minister. You know, another one. So look, this way, referral, exhibition, report, and it comes back to us. We get the public response, and that's what we need. Give a report, and as I say, in the end, the minister will make a decision. But it's a long way off yet. It's a long way off yet. It's going to take for a fair few months, if not years.
Thank you. Right of reply, Alderman Womberto.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
So the motion before the chair is the officer's recommendation, which incorporates option 3. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Now we move on to item 11.7.2, World Health Organisation Global Report on Ageism. Alderman Womberto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have circulated an alternative motion which is the same for the first dot point of the officer's recommendation, but a change to the second dot point and replacing that with that Council, as Tasmania's first World Health Organisation age-friendly city and community, shows its tangible support for combating ageism by making the Every Age Counts pledge on the inaugural Ageism Awareness Day, 1st of October 2021.
Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Berto, would you like to speak further on it? Or?
Thank you. Just very briefly, Mr Mayor, as everybody would be aware, we have actually had the discussion paper for a number of weeks now. It came out on the 9th of August in our Alderman's briefing report. And so this is, if you like, formalising that discussion paper and the recommendations within it. As we all know, in 2014, Clarence was the first Tasmanian WHO global age-friendly city and community, and there are 35 such cities across Australia. We're currently working on our third plan, the Age-Friendly Clarence Plan 2018 to 22, which takes a life course approach to age. It's inclusive of people from birth through to death. And we are looking at continuous improvement in various areas related to age-friendly actions and combating ageism, and we report on a regular basis to the WHO. As you're all aware, there's an attachment both in this report and the briefing that we got in August, which details the achievements that we have actually had in relation to aspects related to age-friendly work within the city and also combating ageism. And it also looks at the opportunities for future actions. It's quite a detailed attachment that I'm sure everybody has looked at, so I won't go through that. The WHO global strategies in the ageism report that they have done looks at three areas: policy and law, educational interventions and intergenerational interventions. And the attachment actually details what we have achieved and what we're looking to achieve in those particular areas. The aspect of the Every Age Counts campaign, I believe, is symbolic. This campaign has been operating since 2017, and it has a coalition of members that are very high profile. They include COTA Australia, the Australian Association of Gerontology, the Australian Human Rights Commission, National Seniors Australia, the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, Anglicare Australia and Aged and Community Services Australia. So very high profile. There's no cost in terms of us pledging to the Every Age Counts campaign. However, as I say, I believe it is a very symbolic act that highlights the valuable work that this council has been undertaking for a large number of years, and that our Mayor was very instrumental in setting in place. So I would ask all of you to support the amended motion, and that we pledge in a symbolic act on the 1st of October, the inaugural Ageism Awareness Day. Thank you.
Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just very briefly, I'd like to thank Alderman von Berto for making those couple of changes as we all discussed, or most of us discussed on Friday at the workshop, and I think let's just get on with it because we aren't getting any younger.
Alderman James.
Yes, look, it's interesting, and I don't want to detract from anything that's been mentioned in relation to ageism within the city and for what the World Health Organisation, is aiming at here. And of course, one of the thoughts that goes through my mind is that, okay, we have an ageing population in Clarence, but we also have a youth. We have many people that I find that may be sort of left out of the count. And I know this particularly addresses what a lot of work has been done since 2002 in doing something about what Tasmania's council has been very hard working at. But I would like to think that that the very nature of Clarence being not only considering this particular approach, but also to try to find some grounding for the younger people within the city and have some sort of plan to be able to take into consideration their aspirations and so on. And every day I'm coming across instances of where young people are basically not able to, because of their status and their income levels, they're unable to obviously find a house or find accommodation. And that not only happens in Clarence but also in every other place within Tasmania. But my point I'm making here is I support this, but at the same time I think we need to consider probably the lowest common denominator in all of this, and that is the younger people within the city. And if we can try to, well, obviously have some sort of process towards looking after or making young people aware that there is some support within the community, and this council, by its very nature of supporting ageism as it is, then I think we are covering all bases and therefore making it fairly reasonable and considerate for that. I will be supporting this, but at the same time I would like to think that not only should we be looking at ageism as part of this particular process, but also our younger people and their desires and needs. And also in particular, if we were able to come out with some sort of policy on perhaps climate change and making it aware that not only are we supporting the sort of ageism and the people who have basically moved into retirement or have been looking towards some sort of retirement mode, that we need to be actually considering some of these key aspects that young people desire and seek from its community leaders to be able to support their aspirations and considerations. I will be supporting this, but at the same time believe that we ought to be doing more in relation to the younger generation within the city.
Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My understanding of ageism is that it's discrimination based on age. So I'm not quite sure what Alderman James is proposing here. I think climate change, while very important, and opportunities for youth, whilst very important, don't fit into this category. I thank Alderman von Berto for bringing this motion and including a positive action that we can take to say, yes, we are aware that ageism is a problem, and if you don't think it's a problem, maybe, well, congratulations, maybe you're just not old yet. But for many of us, it hits round about 40s, you start to realise that doors are beginning to close and that the opportunities aren't as great as they were in our 20s. And that while it's difficult to prove, we know that opportunities often go to younger people who are likely to be around for longer in terms of jobs and so on. So it is a problem. It is something that we need to be aware of. It is something that we need to tackle to ensure that our city continues to be welcoming and inclusive for people as they age, and that we do not discriminate against people because of their age. So I will be supporting this.
Okay. Well, Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The first thing that comes to mind is maybe I should have declared a conflict of interest on this one. I think the important words, and although I commend Alderman von Berto for putting a positive step and committing us to a positive step, I think in the new wording there's something that's been sort of left out, and that is that the National Advocacy Campaign aimed at tackling ageism against older Australians. And I think that's the important point about this whole campaign, and that's the important bit about the pledge. So, to start talking about it as, we also need a campaign for not older Australians, and we also, of course we do, but you don't wrap them up in the one campaign. The campaign's got to have a particular focus group, and the more you spread it out, the more irrelevant it becomes. So I'm all for taking the pledge to be a bit kinder to myself.
Alderman Chong.
Perhaps like Alderman Mulder, I should declare a conflict because I'm definitely older than I was before. Can I just say, in the report on 218, it actually talks about the words of the pledge, which says we stand for a world without ageism where people of all ages are valued and respected. And I will say, and I'm sorry, but I need to correct the record here, we do have a youth action plan. We do have a youth advisory committee. We have youth from our city who have input into what happens in the city and how these things work. So we do, as a council, endeavour to cover all ages within our community as best we can. This particular pledge, yes, it's going to take part on the Ageism Awareness Day on the 1st of October, and I do think it's important that we all support it, whatever age group we belong to.
Any other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Thank you. Look, we have an amended motion before us, and I encourage people to support it, because to not support it is to not endorse the discussion paper. The issue of the pledge as well. First up, I've got to say I take a dim view about the fact that we didn't discuss this in a workshop. It's a discussion paper, and we note it as part of the stuff that gets circulated in our mailbag. And I think this issue is one of gravity and warranted the time in a workshop. The discussion paper is based off the WHO report. The WHO report is 202 pages long, and there isn't many pictures in it. It's a weighty document. In 1990, the recession we had to have occurred. People in their 40s, quite a significant amount, lost their jobs, and a frightening component of that cohort never went back into the workplace. There is roles to play in addressing that issue. There is the mental health, there is the society wellbeing component, and then there is the humongous economic productivity issues. Council can't solve all these issues, but we really do have a role to play with this. And some of it dovetails into what will come up in the inclusion report about, how, there's what we can do to sort of build facilities that are friendly to people across the entire age spectrum. So, bearing that in mind, I think it would have been better to sort of, again, the give consideration process would have been a chance to, I guess, discuss things in wider terms and to look at what other opportunities we take. The discussion paper that we don't discuss is before us. It does have some good points in it. Is this all that we could and should have had? Probably not. So do support it, but in future, again, as I said, we have a workshop process, and if we need to be starting these things sooner, I think that's what we get paid to do.
Thank you. Alderman Edmonds.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll support this, but I concur. There are so many things that are brought to a council meeting that aren't workshop, but are in, at least in Wednesday night's papers. This is an amendment. I just would have thought we could have found time to have, again, just workshop. I don't want to get into over-workshopping things, but we've shown we're capable of having something discussed in 10, 15 minutes, and I would have appreciated that. However, we are where we are. Pledgy stuff, is what it is, but and I'll be supporting it. I just, again, a bit of a process thing. If we can see these things coming, why don't we have a quick chat about it?
The right of reply? I'll put the motion in that we endorse the discussion paper and sign up to Every Age Counts. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. 11.7.3 concerns a change of rules to the Copping Refuse Disposal Site Joint Authority, that we adopt the proposed amendment to those rules. Thank you, Alderman Walker. Do I have a seconder? Thanks, Alderman Pearce. Alderman Walker.
Like many sort of structures set up in you could say a quango or an NGO or a quasi sort of entity basis, they're often not that elegant and always dynamic and adaptive to change. This entity's come a long way forward, and we're now in a position where, something that might have been unthinkable times ago is that we actually do need a dividend policy to look at dealing with surplus returns, and that in turn also will allow for rational pricing as well, or best practice pricing. So on that basis, I strongly urge colleagues to support.
Other speakers? Put the motion. All those in favour? Motion is carried unanimously. Moving on to 11.7.4, concerning tree vandalisation at Alexander Esplanade.
I'll move that, Mr Mayor.
I move the officer's recommendation. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Alderman Blomley. Alderman Von Verto.
I think that the actual recommendation is very clear, and the report that goes with it is well done and explains the situation very clearly. I believe we are leaders. We need to stand up and actually say and make it very clear in a formal manner that this sort of behaviour is not acceptable. So I support the officer's recommendation wholeheartedly.
Thank you, Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. What occurred here was absolutely outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. It's a sensitive area, as we all know, and someone's taken it upon themselves to murder some wonderful vegetation. It's just disgraceful what's occurred here. It's also come at a cost, a great cost, to the ratepayers of Clarence. We're talking $28,000. And that's not to mention the unsightly screens that'll go up to protect the area has to be revegetated. A very loud message needs to be sent, and this is that loud message. So I fully endorse the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I think most of us received some correspondence from the Landcare Group in relation to a similar event that occurred some time ago, and I think in his his email to us, he did make the point that he ventured into a similar process, and other councils in other places have in fact followed through with a similar recommendation that the officers have put to us this evening. I did respond to him and said, look, I'm just wondering as to whether the deterrent of let's look at it again, fencing in 3 sections, steel poles approximately 3 metres high with chain wire fencing installed at a height of 1 metre off the ground, with steel backstays if required. The chain wire fencing will allow signage to be installed. Each section of fencing will be between 4 to 6 metres long and be covered with shade cloth to obscure views resulting from tree removal or a loss of foliage. It really is a grandiose means to basically have people and it acting as a deterrent for future acts of this sort of destruction and vandalism. Just think of the scenario that if the resident who was living, or there was a person who I believe would have perhaps seen, or we may have thought that may have observed this sort of action, and therefore may have taken necessary action. But of course, without mentioning names or addresses, we know that property was vacant and therefore at the time, and therefore there wasn't any sort of surveillance by the community in relation to this. And so this particular action occurred, and it caused the loss of some of these beautiful trees. I'm just concerned that does it send the right message to people? Okay, there is a penalty here or a reward, and I've got no problems with that. And in my response to the gentleman today, I said to him, look, I don't know if a screening or this sort of work will in fact deter people from doing something else, or will it basically cause some of these people to actually go and do something else somewhere else, and therefore just in spite. So look, I know there needs to be a reward offered. I know there needs to be more community participation, but I just find that putting up a 3 metre high fence, yes, as mentioned here, with shade cloth and chain mail, it just sort of means that I think that it's not the way we ought to be doing this. And the perpetrators are basically going to, I think, laugh at us, because of what we are trying to do here is basically giving them some indication to go and do something somewhere else in spite. I would rather like us to have the community involved in this, and I know there are many people in that particular area and along the coastal that would be party to this, and I think that by offering a reward and also by actually having a PR program, that we are very, very concerned about this, and really strong action will be taken. But to spend this sort of money and erect a fence, which I think will basically be an attraction or some sort of measure that these perpetrators will go and do something somewhere else in spite.
Thank you. Alderman Walker and then Alderman Newington.
Thank you. Yeah, there was a close shave there between the two of us. Look, this motion speaks to how I viscerally feel about the issue. I think all of us are totally appalled by it. It's brazen, it's callous, and it's pretty far from okay. So, look, I would encourage people to, whilst, again, viscerally wanting to probably vote for this as it stands, to just take a breath, abstain, consider the alternative that I will be putting up if this doesn't pass. That alternative that I foreshadow, Your Worship, is simply points A and C as they stand now. So that's B and D gone, and adding the following: that Council gives consideration to further measures which may include screening and signage after the adoption of the revised tree policy. The tree policy is currently out and about as we're speaking now, and it's an opportunity for us to firm up how we want to respond. It's an opportunity to work through best practice and elegant solutions. We probably will have a lot of potential examples to use from councils, interstate, etc., to base a way forward. And it may well be those exact points there. But beware the law of unintended consequences. Because let me tell you, if the response to poisoning some trees is a guarantee of chain wire and screening, you're looking at a pretty great way for people to enact malicious harm on people that they don't particularly care for by poisoning trees nearby their house. I also don't like straight away going for something that might be perceived as collective punishment for individual action. So it may well still be the best way forward, but if we can, telegraph our strong, disappointment and anger at this through the moving to replant the trees, but also offering that reward, that's a really good starting point on which to base other things when we have a solid tree policy behind us. So I'm not going to vote against it. I am going to abstain, and hopefully there'll be the numbers there for me to move those foreshadowed processes, because I'm not sure where we might end up if we just go on our visceral response alone.
Thank you, Alderman Newington.
Thank you. Look, obviously, it's not on. We've got to, act on this pretty quickly and try and find a way to make sure this sort of stuff doesn't happen. But also I agree with some of the points that Alderman Walker's raised there. And my concern got to having a good look through the area there. There's still quite a lot of foliage and trees in through there that are, 3 metres high at least. And I mean, at worst, I was going to ask if we could have something in there that basically said before doing that, we have a chance to look at it, rather than just sign off on something that we might see go up and then have issues in relation to that. I mean, I'm not. So, I mean, I don't know, I was going to ask Alderman von Berto, and it sort of deals with sort of what some of the things that Alderman Walker sort of raised there, that could be brought back to a workshop. That we could have a look at what is proposed prior to that happening, and that would sort of deal with some of the concerns that Alderman Walker's got, and the concerns that I have as well, because looking at how it all look, I mean, that's potentially the issue that we're faced there. So that was all I was going to say. Is that?
Thank you.
Can I ask Alderman von Berto if she'd consider that? Or?
Yeah, well, I mean, she's already taken that on notice, and we'll talk about it in a right of reply, I guess, but there's no opportunity for dialogue in between.
I thought Alderman Newington was asking for an amendment.
Sorry?
Well, just to ask for an amendment to say that before that's done, we could have a look at the design, have an opportunity to look at that, what is proposed prior to it actually happening. That's all. I mean, that probably would have happened anyway, but.
Look, I think that's really a matter for how the General Manager would go about implementing a decision if we take it, rather than, I guess we could amend it to require, but we need some words.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'd ask Alderman von Berto maybe to consider that and some of the other comments. But yeah, certainly whatever we can to stop this sort of stuff, I think there's no issue there.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something. I sense that what Alderman Walker is suggesting is probably going to achieve what you've just tried to articulate. Yeah. Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a significant act of destruction and it needs a significant response. I believe it needs that response now. While I appreciate the issues raised by my colleagues, there's nothing in this motion that commits us to doing this every time this happens, or indeed how long these may stay up. So I would really like to see, and the community is asking us to respond. They're saying, what are you going to do about this? I'd like to see some action, and some very visible action taken now in this shorter time frame as possible. Whether that stays up for until a reward is, or until a culprit is found or not, is another matter for discussion. But I will be supporting this motion.
Thank you. Alderman Pearce and then Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I'm not going to support the motion as is, because I think what Alderman Walker said has got some merit. And I went and had a look down there, and when I look at this 28,000, I'm thinking, what are we doing with fencing? There's already a fence there. What are we going to do? Put a 10-foot steel fence there? I have no idea. Tree planting with stakes and cages, $10,000. To me, that's a bit of an overkill. Now, look, I didn't want those trees vandalised like they were, but they were. And to put up screens, like other aldermen have said, I think it's a bit of an overkill at the moment. I'd just like us to take a bit of a deep breath and just say, what is the best way to go about this? Now, yes, I agree with certainly coordinate replanting of the poison trees, but geez, the cost here, I'm just wondering about that, and offer a reward. No argument with that whatsoever. But geez, the other things just worry me at the moment, because I'm a bit like Alderman James said, if we put up screens, are we just saying to people, we're going to do this every time we have screens? We could have screens everywhere. Now, hopefully this will be the last time vandalism like this happens. Now, in the report, and I tried to look to see how many times trees are being vandalised. I couldn't see anything. I don't know if it's a regular occurrence. It happens once a year. It happens once a week. I have no idea. So when I look at spending $28,000, I get a little bit nervous of spending ratepayers' money. So I'm more inclined to go somewhere along the lines of what Alderman Walker proposed.
Thank you, Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There's not much more that I can add to that. Alderman Pearce got to his feet before me, but I'm thinking along the similar lines to Alderman Walker, Pearce and Ewington, in the sense that B really does worry me. You know, how do we put timeframes around it? You know, and is it going to be the deterrent? Is it much more of a, you know, public messaging that needs to go out? I'm very happy to support A and C, but B and D do concern me.
Thank you. Mulder.
Well, thank you, Mr Mayor. Likewise, B and D are a little problematic for me. Just to pull some of them apart, that we're going to install the screens with the intention of interrupting the views of the Derwent River created by the loss of the trees. Now, views from where? Views from the 2 3-storey houses on the hill? It's going to be pretty big screens. The screens are going to have to be at least the size of the trees that they're replacing. And in many of the cases, it's only the foliage that's opened up the vistas. I can see the point in punishing, but who are we punishing here? You know, I'm not going to speculate as to who the chief suspects are. We'll leave that to anyone else. But it may have had nothing to do with the interrupting of the views. It may have been some other particular reason that goes there, and as someone who's dealt with my share of them over the years, who knows why people do things? They sometimes don't even know themselves, but they see an opportunity and then they do things. So I'm not too sure about the screens. I've got some concerns about them. I know it looks like a good thing to do, but then who are you punishing? And, you know, are the screens more unsightly? Are the screens going to be vandalised? What are we going to do if they are? Because we'll have been caught on, and we'll have to respond again. You know, you get caught into these cycles of tit for tat. So I'd like some more thought given to it. I'd also like some consultation with the land care group as to what they think, whether they think screens are an appropriate place. And in the question of how long they're going to stay there, D spells it out, in place until all the newly planted trees are at least 4 metres tall and permanently re-established in the area. So I don't know the growth rates of some of these species, but that's a fair few years before they get up to 4 metres. And if they're up to 4 metres, you know, you don't have to be too far up the hill before the views will be back. So I'm not too sure about that response. I know it sounds good, but I don't think it's agreed. The only other issue I have too about, I know what the intent is, but you offer a confidential reward of $10,000, that can send a message to someone who might have been willing to give evidence without which you will never get a conviction. So, you know, I'm not too sure that rewards generally are confidential unless the person in receipt of them wants to, you know, come public and give evidence of the matter that is concerned. But having looked at those things, and that's a minor matter really, but I'll have a look at it. I'm willing to vote against this particular motion, and I am somewhat inclined to the alternative that's been suggested by Alderman Walker, who no doubt has had plenty of time to fulfil a comprehensive and a report with the reasons for his alternative motion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Like Alderman Warren, I'm going to support this motion. I think, as she does, it's very important that we give a firm response to this. I firmly believe that if we don't do anything at all, if we just put off this discussion, that people will assume that this is fine. This is perfectly acceptable. If we don't like trees where they happen to be, just get rid of them. I don't think this is an out of proportion response. I think we need to send a really clear message, and I think that's what this is doing. It's saying that we don't believe this behaviour is acceptable, that we are going to do something about it. When we see it, we're going to call it out. The way that we're going to do that is put these fences up. The cost has been referenced a couple of times. If you look at the cost, more than half of that relates actually to the new trees that we're going to plant. The fence itself and the screening itself is $12,000 of the total, she said, hoping she's got that right. Essentially, the bulk of the cost is in the new trees and making sure that they grow properly. And this screening will help protect those trees as they grow. I think it's important that we put a correct response as quickly as possible.
Alderman Edmonds.
Finish off the circuit. Yes, when I first heard about this, I was pretty mad. You walk past, there's the bandicoots or the bird life. It's a little pocket right in suburbia between the road and the beach. Beautiful part of our city, one that I enjoy as much as anyone. So there was definitely an element of, you stick it into them, over when we heard about it. And then we had the motion, and to the GM's credit, we workshopped this on Monday night. It's sort of unfortunate because it's happened so fast. It sort of turned up in the report after you get a couple of days to sort of go. And I am sympathetic to the notion of knocking B and D out and replacing them something along the lines with take further action pending council's tree policy and a council workshop. And just sniffing the breeze, because I know what council minutes look like when they're printed and people vote. I was thinking perhaps not to want to steal anyone's thunder, but to propose potentially to the mover and seconder that we do that to get a more unanimous vote, that we strike out B and D and replace it with language to that effect. And I would be interested to see if in the interests of teamwork, collegiality, olive branches, that they would be big enough to accept that.
The mover of the motion has not accepted your suggestion.
No. That's a shame, Mr Mayor, because we're going to get a divided vote on this and then potentially another divided.
Well, there's still a prospect that everyone will back the foreshadowed motion if this is lost.
That's true. Anyway, I just think that initial haste and anger, I think we can do a more strategic response that actually is. I mean, we always bang on about our policies. We've got a policy right in the works that will deal with this imminently. We can talk about it further in terms of response. Because I can remember being fined for something when I was at university I had nothing to do with, but the whole lot of us got fined. And that's such a... It undermined the credibility of the person who issued it, and they never really recovered. I'm not saying that's going to happen here, but I do think that just taking a deep breath and getting it right won't take very long at all, and will be in line with the policy that we bring in. This sort of preempts the policy, and what does that mean? If the policy doesn't have this in, is that regret? I don't know. Anyway, I'll support the foreshadowed amended recommendation.
Thank you. Alderman von Berto, right of reply?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I thank everyone for their contributions. This recommendation, with its various parts, is, if you like, not an innovative response. Many councils across Australia actually do something similar, and their responses are graded by the severity of what occurs. And what I've heard from the aldermen who've spoken is that they believe that this was an action that was abhorrent, that shouldn't have occurred, that was egregious. And so this is a strong response to a large number of trees being poisoned in an area that a number of us have said is a very special place in terms of flora and fauna. So I think it's important to remember that this response is in accordance with the draft tree policy. Yes, it goes further than what's in the policy, but it certainly looks at the aspect of replanting trees to restore the landscape and to installing vandalism signage. So I think we need to keep that very strongly in mind. And also, as I've said, that aspect of that there can be a variety of responses in the various situations that might occur. Alderman Pearce asked about how often does this type of vandalism occur. I've been on council for nearly 15 years. I've been very involved in the various iterations of the tree policy and process that goes with it. And I can't remember anything of this magnitude before. So I actually feel that we need to, as Alderman Warren said, take action now, not action when we finally have the tree policy that it has been approved. That might take quite some time. And I feel that we need to have a response immediately to this situation. I don't believe it's about punishing.
Thank you, Alderman Longworth. So the motion is the officer's recommendation, embracing A, B, C and D. All those in favour? Against? Taking into account the abstention, the motion is lost. Alderman Walker.
Thank you. Look, here we go. And just as far as the summing up went, it is egregious and it was abhorrent. And we're not... the foreshadowed motion, which, if it's not up on the screen, is A and C.
Do we have a seconder before you wax lyrical, please? Alderman Kennedy, thank you.
With the following after those points. So it's the entirety of A and C, with B and D gone, and the following, that Council gives consideration to further measures which may include screening and signage after the adoption of the revised tree policy, trees on Council land.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. Once again, why haven't we got a written alternative motion? I want to see a written alternative motion.
I think the substance of what's there, A and C, are quite clear, and the articulation of the new point that Alderman Walker made is fairly straightforward. So in this case, I'm going to permit it.
I would say, as a point of personal clarification, I did email this exact thing around earlier today. This is not coming out of nowhere. We want to do something, and we will be sending a strong message by moving with A and offering that $10,000 fine. But yes, there is a draft tree policy that's gone out. It is now an active and live discussion in our community. And let me tell you, it is going to be very different and more robust by the time we are done with that, given the circumstances that are all before us. And it provides the opportunity to see what happens interstate, to do the best practice from interstate, but to learn the upsides of some of those deterrence measures, but also be aware of the downsides. This is egregious, what occurred. This is abhorrent. But the visceral response, I don't think, is the best way forward. There are potentially unintended consequences. And collective punishment for individual actions, I don't think is something that we should just be dismissing out of hand. So I'd ask that we go ahead with this, and I'd repeat that the way that final point reads, we can potentially still do all of what's there in front of us and even more should we wish to. But we need to get this right because we have a lot of trees and a lot of coastline, and if the whole thing's going to be screened with metal, we're going to go broke and it's not going to be a fun place to live.
Thank you, Alderman Kennedy.
No, thank you.
Other speakers?
I just would like clarification on that last sentence, which I think from memory, Mr Mayor, was something along the lines that you would still go ahead with the screening.
Give consideration to...
Yes, could that be repeated? Because that really is the stumbling block for me. If it was just A and C, I would be...
Are we able to get that?
I want to support A and C, but if there's still the fallback position on screening and fencing, and I find myself, I just would like to make sure that's clear.
Thank you. Well, in putting the motion in the right of reply, I'm sure the words will be repeated for all of our benefit, Alderman James.
Well, that is an absolute wonder.
Thank you,
Mr Mayor.
Any other speakers? Alderman Mulder.
Mayor, I share some similar concerns with Alderman James, and would perhaps suggest that if we just had, I'll suggest an amendment that we simply amend the non-written words that were previously circulated, and we remove those, and we simply the motion comes back to simply A and C.
Yes, I'd be very happy to.
Alderman Walker, it's been recommended that you amend the motion. Mover and seconder, are you agreeing?
Just don't see.
Look,
stuff can happen anyway.
I do understand. I do understand what Alderman Mulder is trying to say. I just get concerned that then closes the matter rather than giving us the scope.
No.
So
thank you, Alderman Mulder. Please continue.
Okay. I'll make 2 points. One is that I now have concerns about the fences and the stuff like that. It doesn't close off not having fences. It just means that's another response that we could sort out. And my concern with it wasn't after the tree policy. I mean, that was my concern with it. I think that if that's a decision we need to go, and we really need to kick it around a little bit more and talk to a few more of the community before we race into these sorts of putting fences up. But do we need to wait until after the tree policy is in place, in which case it'd be a little bit pointless? People will start to wonder why it's there rather than do it. So anyway, the amendment wasn't acceptable. So the other issue I've got really grave concerns about is that, the Crown is, this is appalling, this is terrible, and all the rest of it. It's their land, and they won't even come to the party to assist in any way, shape or form. What a strong message it was sent if both levels of government were to go out there and equally condemn this act of vandalism. Sitting back there saying, I'm appalled, well, demonstrate your appalledness, if that's a word, it's not, by coming to the party. Don't sit there and say, the ratepayers of Clarence we can't afford it. Because that's just nonsense. That's just them shirking their responsibility, shirking their ability to express their appointment, their annoyance at it. If you're trying to send a message to the community, what about the landowner stumping up some of the reward money? What about the landowner helping to, defraying the costs of offsetting the trees? Let's do this as a partnership. Let's get together and send this message out. Don't sit there in your little office wringing your hands saying, no, we haven't got any money for that. But we agree with council should spend all this money. I just think if you want to send a bad message to the community, lump it all on council, even though we don't own the land. And then when we want to put a fence up, we've got to get permission from them. And when we've got to do this and we've got to do that. Well, sorry, come and join us. Come and join us in condemning this sort of behaviour. Put your hand in your pocket like we have to put our hands in the ratepayers' pockets and to express our outrage at this sort of thing. So, and that's where I think the message gets mixed. That's where, one level of government says, well, yes, this is absolutely terrible, but we'll leave you to fix it, even though it's our land. And I think that's the point that I make. I'm not opposed to the fences going up. I'm just wondering what sort of fences there'll be, where they'll be, how big they'll be. And these are the sorts of things we ought to sit around, kick around, we ought to talk to the community about, and we ought to move on. So there's no great rush to put those fences up. And I really am reluctant to support the motion if we're not going to do anything until we've got a tree policy. But then that's always something we can come back and have a look at if we, if we collectively decide, yep, we're going to put some fences up there, but we're going to do it in a few months' time, or we've had a talk to the community and we think fences would be a good idea, but we know we haven't got the tree policy in. Then it's simply a motion coming back into this chamber, and we can tick it off then. So I'm not totally devastated by the rejection of my eminently sensible suggestion, but we'll move on with that. But I'll be supporting this at this stage.
Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'm going to support this motion. That's one of the reasons I asked the question earlier, because Alderman Moulder's quite right. It's not even our land, and yet that's why I raised it earlier. This fencing, what kind of fencing is this? $10,000. Now, going down there and having a look at the fence, I'm saying, what the hell are we going to do for $10,000? What are we doing? We're going to tree planting with stakes and cages, another $10,000. It's not our land. I keep coming back to that. I mean, I really do wonder. Now, I think we're doing the right thing by holding off, doing the tree policy and discussing this further, because I think those screens are just going to draw attention, and I think this vandalism may get worse if we just start doing that willy-nilly. I mean, I agree. It's not just council, it's Crown land as well, so they should be joining in with us and some of the cost. Now, look, this does look bad, but geez, we cannot do everything by ourselves, and that's why I'm prepared to support this motion, because I think we need a fair bit of discussion on this. I really do.
Thank you. Other speakers? Do I reply, Alderman Walker?
Yeah, look, thank you, people, for your contributions. We're all, I think, want to take action. We just have different thoughts on the way forward. And I'm hoping that whilst this might not be all of what everyone around the table initially wants to happen straight away, ANC sent some very strong messages. And the further point, which I will now read out, that I circulated in an email at 3:54 this afternoon, that Council gives consideration to further measures which may include screening and signage after the adoption of the revised tree policy, (trees on council land). The point being, and it's been raised about discussing with the land care groups about the way forward, we can be having these discussions as of tomorrow, and these will be good things. And as I said, this will all be potentially feeding back into that whole process of what the draft tree policy will evolve into, and I think it is going to have potentially more teeth than what it went out with. There is best practice examples from elsewhere, as I said. We can be learning from that as we go through this process, and all avenues remain open to further action along and on top of ANC, which we are already agreeing to hopefully do when we vote in support of this motion.
Thank you. So the motion before the chair is A and C plus the extra words that Alderman Walker so kindly just read out. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Moving on to 11.7.5, the draft access and inclusion plan. We are being invited to take this out for community consultation. Thank you, Alderman Warren. Do I have a seconder, please? Alderman Blomley, thank you. Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to say that quite a lot of work has been done on this, but I think we've gone as far as we can with 12 or 11 and a half able-bodied, white, middle-aged people sitting around the table talking about an access and inclusion plan. It's time for it to go out to the people that it actually affects, who have lived experience in this area, and hear what they have to say. And then it will come back to us for a workshop, and we can make an informed decision on whether we've covered all the bases.
Thank you. Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr.
Other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Yeah, look, I'll be supporting this. We did get the opportunity to further consultation amongst ourselves before going out, and I appreciated the opportunities to sit down with officers and talk through some matters. So it'll go out to community consultation. It'll come back up to us for further consideration. As I said, it ties in a bit with the previous motion around here, but it is so much more. Council has specific skills and strengths that can really make a big difference, and I look forward to us focusing on that.
Thank you. Other speakers? In that case, I presume there's no need for a right of reply. The motion is that we approve the draft for community consultation. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. And now we move to the new item 11.7.6, which is actually 13.5.A, which authorises the General Manager to commence negotiations with Scouts Australia, Tasmania branch, regarding the possible purchase of a Scout Hall located at 2B Loyna Road, Montague Bay. If we could... is it possible just to get that up or not? Probably not. Okay. So, do I have a mover and a seconder, please?
It's 13.5A.
It's 13.5A. Moved, thank you, Alderman Warren. Seconded, Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Warren, would you like to speak to it, please?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think when I first started on council 3 years ago, we talked about a strategic land register and how it would be useful to have in our back pocket a list of land parcels that may be useful to acquire, so that if they ever came on the market, that we could make that purchase for the greater good of Clarence. And this is one such parcel of land. It sits very neatly with other assets like the Clarence swimming pool and the sports centre behind that, and completes that section of land, which is also very close to a major thoroughfare highway, a very popular bus stop opposite Rose Bay High, and there's a lot of potential for this piece of land in terms of cycle and ride, sort of bike and bus arrangements. I think it makes sense for us to purchase this piece of land. It also it's got a feel-good factor in that it would actually be useful to the Scouts for us to purchase this property. But at the same time, it would be useful to many other residents, so we could make this property available to other residents. As one of my colleagues pointed out in the workshop, there isn't a community hall in this area, so there's a great one in Lindisfarne and other parts of the municipality, but nothing in the Rose Bay, Montague Bay area. So this would be a useful addition to our property portfolio, and the way land prices are, it's not going to be likely to be going backwards in value. So I see this as a useful strategic piece of land for us to acquire.
Thank you. Alderman Kennedy.
Really nothing more I could add to that, Mr Mayor, other than I do see it as being a very strategic asset that we should be purchasing. No different to, everyone knows that I was very much in support of the purchase of the squash centre, which I get reminded of on a regular basis. And we have wonderful tenants there. I won't even go into what that property would be worth now, so yes, I'm supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Pearce, and then Alderman Newington.
A couple of questions, Mayor. Now, we buy this land and we lease it back, or part of it back, to the Scouts. Is that correct?
That's the plan.
Yes, but before that happens, does the lease come to us? Because, as I say, I've been through the site and I believe you could make a couple of changes that would benefit both the Scouts and Council, a couple of minor changes. So does that come back to us, or what happens?
Through you, Mayor, the lease, there's a couple of ways that we could do this. Depending on a successful negotiation, then the purchase and a subsequent lease in principle could be part of that decision, or it could be separated as a separate decision. So it really just depends on how council wishes to frame the recommendation. It doesn't necessarily need to be the whole lease in its entirety in a report. It can simply be the key terms. We have a standard form that we of lease that we normally use. So particular issues that council might want to see addressed in a lease can certainly be workshopped and then built into a recommendation.
I'd be more comfortable with that. That's the case for certain reasons. As we know, and I don't say it's jokingly, there's work to be done on the building, and I've discussed this with the General Manager this morning. And so I'm just looking at the price. I know it's a cheaping piece of land, there's no risk on that, but it does need a fair bit of work done to it. So, as I say, that's got to be put into the consideration as well, I believe, because I've been there, I know, and again, I discussed it with the General Manager this morning. All right, I'm for it.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Blomley and then Alderman Newington had the odd, and then Alderman Blomley.
Look, just on this one, I mean, look, you know, I'm in, you know, obviously want to keep the community informed about what's going on out there and in terms of what we're doing with these sorts of purchases. But also know that over the years we've had these sort of debates in private session or closed session for a reason. And while I'm not concerned that we're... bottom line is there are issues involved with paper. So all we're actually doing, all we were proposing to do at this stage was to authorise the GM to come back with a report that answered all the questions like that Alderman Pearce has raised, and probably some other concerns that other aldermen might have had, and there would be concerns that I would have had before I was prepared to sign off on going down this path. Now, other aldermen have a right to say I'd prefer it to be an open meeting, and obviously that's occurred in the media in the last couple of days. But I'll just have to say, while I've got the opportunity, Mr Mayor, that I'm disappointed that the word secret seemed to be thrown in there all the time about we're deliberately trying to, you know, keep this information from the public. We've gone down that path for a particular reason, and I find it really disappointing that those sort of things are raised in the media, and we're put in a position where, you know, we're made out to be doing something that we shouldn't be doing because this is traditionally what's happened in this place. But anyway, that's okay, Mr Mayor. But the point is that you know, this is all we're doing here is authorising the GM to address this, to look at it. There is, you know, some support there for us to go down this path, and it's two properties as well. So it's an area land in Goodman's Road. Which
yeah, look, we can only talk about this one. Not the whole lot has come out of.
Right, okay, well, I'll take that one back. Okay, anyway, but I've said my point. But yeah, I think this is something, finding out the full state of the situation and moving forward on it all is something that's it's important that we do that.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And this motion's very sound. It's about authorising the GM to start some negotiations with the organisation that wished to sell their building. And it is, as Alderman Warren pointed out, I think very eloquently, a strategic land acquisition. And what's more, the current owners are looking to enter into arrangement with us, or they've flagged their desire to look at a lease arrangement with us going forward as well. Alderman Kennedy touched on the acquisition of the squash courts, and I don't think I was alone this afternoon when I received an email from Tasmania's most respected and well-known property expert, who, in his email to me at least, referenced the purchase of 1 Alma Street, Bellerive, of course bought by the ratepayer Clarence for $900,000 in December 2019. This is now estimated to have more than doubled in value over that period of time. Now, I do take the point that is made to me sometimes that we're not core business to be in the business of land speculation, but it is core business to make sound business decisions in the best interest of our ratepayers. And that's what this will be. That's what this is about making a decision that is strategic and is also affordable. Now, we're told in our report that we looked at how we're going to purchase this. Our CFO, I have no doubt, has had some input here, and she tells us that it will require funding from outside of the current budget, and there are some debt funding options that are proposed. But we all know interest rates where they are at the moment, whether it's an internal loan or I don't know how they're sort of structural interest rates, whether they're market rates for internal, they are good. Well, now's the time to do it. Now is the time to do it. I think this is an absolute no-brainer, and I'd like to congratulate the officers for the way that they've constructed this report. Of course, we can't in this open session talk about the price, but of my looking at the market throughout Clarence, as we all do from time to time, I think it's a very good buy, and now's the time to do it.
Thank you. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and it's interesting that some of those comments made by the former speaker have really put it into sort of a context that I thought we were not going to head in that direction in relation to, sort of where it's coming from out of the budget and how we are going to pay for it. And I would have thought that in the circumstances we ought to be looking at whether or not this building is appropriate for council. And the motion is along the lines, it's quite clear, commence negotiations regarding the possible purchase of this. Now, that's quite clear. It's going to send a message to the community that council's in the business of real estate, of buying properties, and this is a private enterprise that may want to dispose of their asset. But at the same time, for those who have been and actually been to the site, there's a lot of work that needs doing to this. There's a major drainage in relation to the area between the building and the flats, and that's by the very nature is going to, I believe, take quite a considerable amount of money. The fact of the matter is that council in 2019 purchased the squash court and in Cambridge Road, and that was for a particular group in the community, and this particular building was purchased, and there was the use of that facility on a basis of a lease with the current users. So look, we have to be careful with what we spend the ratepayers' money on, and we're not going to mention the cost of this, but any person or persons who have any idea about any particular building in relation to this would know that there would be a fairly costly exercise in going down this track. And I, for one, will not be supportive of us venturing into the real estate. I did not support the squash centre because I felt it was inappropriate to spend our money in relation to this. And also, too, now we're in the business now of buying up another building, which I think may need a lot of money spent on it, and therefore it may be only for a certain user group and not for the benefit of the community or those people in that vicinity. So look, we should stay clear of this. And the money that ought to be purchased or used for this sort of thing is for our normal infrastructure, our services, and not for basically putting another impost around our necks in relation to maintaining a building which I think needs a considerable amount of money spent on it. And I don't think the community is, in fact, would be supportive of us buying this parcel of land near the Clarence Swim Centre. The other thing I'd like to say in conclusion, Mr Mayor, is that there is a perception that some of these matters are in secret. And I got no problems in when I read the article in the paper today that there is a number of people in the community who see this closed meeting on certain things as in secret. Now, as for good, bad or indifferent reasons, that may be the case, but the word secret is quite appropriate. And in fact, if it's been used in the context which I believe it was used today in the paper, then well done to that person who said that. In conclusion, I don't think we're in the market of real estate, buying buildings and then having to maintain them and doing so on and so forth. I've been an advocate for a number of years now about looking at our portfolio and seeing if we can utilise or dispose of or hand over to the Crown, if that's the case, some of the buildings that we are basically upkeeping and so on and so forth.
And I went to one place on the weekend as a result of a ratepayer making that comment, and that was down to the Lauderdale Hall. He made the comment about the toilets being unsatisfactory and that they're in council's obviously portfolio, and they are substandard and so on and so forth. So look, we should be spending more money on toilets or other infrastructure in our remote areas within the city, down at our far reaches within the community, and spending dollars on that rather than buying a building which I believe is inappropriate and is not in the interests of the ratepayers and citizens of the City of Clarence.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Yes, look, two different speakers, two different points of view regarding property. We are in the services business, but we're also in the assets and infrastructure business. I'm inclined to take a view similar, Your Worship, to Alderman Blomley's rather than Alderman James. We're not in the property game. We're not speculators. If we were, they'd call us UTAS. Look, there's the strategic element of where it's located was noted, and it's something I certainly brought up because yes, Rose Bay comes into the mix. Obviously, Montague Bay, and it's an area that is undergoing a little bit of change, a little bit of densification as we speak. And of course, this would also be the community centre, I think, for the Rosny community as well. So I bear that all in mind. Look, I did vote to keep this enclosed, and I was in the minority, and that's fine. That's totally okay. And we've come to do it in the open, and on we go. But there are issues about property when you think about things. So you go into the government space, and we can go and negotiate. We can go to a property developer and say, gee, we love this estate you're putting in. We want to negotiate to buy that block there. And if they say, oh no, well, we can say, well, actually, we're going to buy it because we have eminent domain. We can compulsorily acquire land. That is, if you like, a potential distortion and arbitrage that is often unreasonable. In a similar way, or slightly similar way, when we bought our house, my spouse and I discussed it in private and got some advice, and then went ahead with it. And I guess the vendors negotiated with the real estate agent and agreed on our offer. These discussions were not held in public, and if one person or one entity is doing so with the video footage and the other isn't, that's not necessarily, and I don't think it is the best way to negotiate. It also means that I may be holding back on some of the things around the quantums for this debate, and holding back on some other queries I might have around the asset, because that might materially impact the negotiations. So I don't think this is the best way forward, but I accept that that's what this table collectively or majoritively agreed to do. So in that verbose roundabout way, I will be supporting the recommendation.
Other speakers? Alderman Mulder.
I won't be supporting the recommendation. I do see there may be some strategic value in this for council as a bicycle park and ride spot, but nowhere in any of this have I seen any discussion of actually developing it into that or using the land that way. But that's something, of course, can come up. And I mean, but I'll pick up the one point about speculation and all the rest of it. This is not us going into the marketplace trying to make an offer to someone for a property that isn't on the market. This isn't a property that's been put on the market, and we are not going into there to discuss it with them. This is a property that was offered to us. It's not on the market. It was offered to us, and I think when you've got that particular situation, that is different. And that is something that the public ought to have some input into whether or not we should accept this offer. We don't have it on any strategic property register that we know we've already discussed about doing and stuff, and I would imagine that property register would have to be pretty secret. No, I think that's just the point about why this should be in the open meeting. But I'm not in favour of this. I've just got some concerns about opportunities coming up and we're responding to them in an ad hoc sort of way. Had we identified a need for a hall in this area at some other stage, and it might not be this particular hall, it might have been any other hall should they come up, I would have been prepared to say, well, yep, we've thought about it, we've discussed it, we've talked about it, and here's an opportunity that comes up and then we might do it. But that's not quite how these things are coming around. It's not how the squash centre came to us, it's not how this hall is coming to us. So, you know, I'm not in favour of it. I don't think that it's an appropriate property acquisition. The bona fides of the organisation are something else, but, you know, if we say yes to them, any other organisation that's short of a bit of a quid and suddenly we're going to take over their property and we're going to do it as well because, quote, you know, they do good work in our community. Well, lots of people do good work in our community, but we don't go buying their houses.
Other speakers? Alderman Evans?
Thank you. And thank you to the 9 votes who supported bringing this into public meeting. I think, as a lot of us have touched on, the original motion was to just bring the debate. And I think that's a really big step in the right direction for us. We voted 5-6 to bring the... we're all talking about the squash court. We voted 5-6 to bring that out, and it was lost, and that was decided in private. I think that's a big turnaround collectively for the council. And honestly, how we vote on the actual motion to me is irrelevant. Everyone's got their right to make a decision. No one's being browbeaten about the position they take tonight. We've heard the reasons why people are going to support it. That's great. My big concern is like there's been zero public input into this. None whatsoever until this morning. And even then it was like people don't even know what it is. But the community first found out about what we might actually be talking about at about 9:45 tonight. And we're seriously making an informed decision, not knowing what the hell people out there want. And yes, there is the fail-safe of when the negotiations occur, it comes back to us for the rubber stamp. But seriously, I don't think anyone thinks that that's going to be the time to knock this on the head. It is in public meeting, and I think that Alderman Mulder touched on the fact that we've got first dibs on this property. This isn't a negotiation in the public sphere. This is a negotiation between 2 parties. We're just telling the people who actually put us here, who pay for us to be here, who trust us to do the job, that this is what we're up to. And I wish we could have done it earlier. You know, I just really think that public input is important, and I'm really encouraged. I think it's a huge step in the right direction for this council that we voted 9-3 on that tonight. I just wish we weren't drag kicking and screaming to it and just did it as part of our usual business. This is a massive decision and have a lasting impact on the way rates are meted to people in this city, about decisions we make about what our priorities are. If someone asked me to reel off a list of things that we need to do better in this city, hall acquisition would not be it for me. We have halls that go unused. They're very easy to book. Yes, they might not be as geographically convenient for people, but they're still there. They're still available. I think we could, if there was an issue with any community organisation that needed a home, I think we could find a way to accommodate them. You know, there's a lot of talk about that squash court, but that was pre-COVID and we got that for unders, dramatic unders. This time we're post-COVID, we've just had rates freezes, our budget processes have been brutal, and we know that the cost doesn't end with the first decision. It's in there, it's in rates notices, it's a percentage that we can't spend when we try and agree on our budget every year. You know, there's the potential for the purchase, the potential is for maintenance, the potential for potential remedial works, who knows. And I take issue, I don't think this is a strategic purchase. It's opportunistic, like the squash court was opportunistic, but the proposition there was so heavily tilted towards being just such a brilliant opportunity that of course you take it. We're in a post-COVID world now. You know, it's money we don't have the luxury of spending in the current environment. You know, and I think we really owe it to our ratepayers to be disciplined with our money. You know, we've sort of sung our own praises through budget processes. Well, here's a chance to actually show some discipline, and we're getting the chequebook out, or potentially getting the chequebook out. You know, I just think the public vote is a huge step forward for this council, but I don't think we can afford this. And I don't want to do a history lesson, but after it being mentioned about these things being done in secret, at the time, Alderman James, I believe, spoke to the Mercury, and I don't have the date here, but I'll just read it out. Clarence Alderman Richard James said the closed-door vote on the council's purchase highlighted a lack of transparency and accountability afforded to ratepayers. I've always been in favour of open and transparent discussions in all council decisions, and I think there should be very few matters discussed in closed meetings, he said. This decision, I feel, slaps with a lack of transparency and accountability in the use of public funds at a local government level. There was no opportunity for the public to have a say. Well, we're here again now. That night, it was Alderman Mulder, Alderman Kennedy, myself, Alderman Von Berto and Alderman James who voted for that to be in public meeting. With the support of Alderman Newington, who posted on social media, talk about going to the media, I agree with Alderman James in today's Mercury that the process should have been more transparent. I just had to put those things on the record because when we have these votes, people should be consistent, and I'm happy to put my record on the line.
I'm going to hand over to the Deputy Mayor. I think that deserves a response. It is really important to understand, pardon me, that if Council is negotiating with another party in a commercial environment, that we don't give away our negotiating position and our commercial strength and intellectual property in the public to the marketplace before we commence those negotiations. We have a duty of care to the ratepayers to ensure that we get the best possible deal we can when we enter into negotiations on a commercial basis. Most property decisions we take are in that vein. This one I voted to support it coming out because it was not in the marketplace as such, and it was something that we could talk about openly for that reason. But I will never support us going into open session on a motion where we compromise our market position in those negotiations. We, unlike the federal government and the state government, do not have a cabinet where we can undertake the business in a commercially sensitive environment. We only have, as a mechanism, as a local government, the opportunity to go into closed session, and it is absolutely fundamental that we're able to protect the ratepayers' position on some of these very sensitive deals. Thank you. I'll take the chair back again, and I think you want to say a few words.
Yes, just very briefly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I guess I just wanted to comment on some of the things that have been said about people in this area not necessarily being keen on a hall or something that they can use. When St James's Church was closing, when it was being deconsecrated, decommissioned, whatever is the appropriate word, we had a huge amount of representations from the local residents for us to acquire that property because they desperately wanted somewhere in that community to meet. It didn't make sense for a whole slew of reasons for us to consider that. But I think that this makes good sense. It's a hall in the right place for the people who live in that community and want to use it. So I will definitely be supporting this.
Any other speakers? Right, a reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do thank my colleagues for their contributions. This motion is purely about authorising the General Manager to commence negotiations. They may or may not be successful, but that's the starting point, and as has been mentioned, that can cover some of those questions that have been raised. There has been a building report done already, but I'm not a building surveyor. I don't know if there are things beyond that report that were not covered, so that's a question that we can ask. No, we're not in the business of buying property and we're not speculating on property. That's not what this is about. I do think it's really important to have these sorts of discussions in open meeting, and I acknowledge that there are things that we will never be able to discuss in open meeting because it would compromise our position. I do wonder though, because we make decisions every meeting about spending ratepayers' money in closed session, and we don't ask for the ratepayers to have an input into that. It simply isn't possible or workable. I think this is a good one to say this is something we're considering because it is something that affects the community, particularly in that area and surrounding areas. So as far as possible to be able to discuss that in open meeting is a positive. There was mention that this was only for a certain user group. That's certainly not the intention. At the moment, it is only used by the Scouts, but if we were to purchase this, then we would be able to make it available to all those other people in the area. And thank you, Alderman Chong, for informing us that there are lots of people who would like to have a community hall in that area. And I do remember St James as being a loss to that community for a number of reasons. It's a balancing act. How much do we do in open meeting? When it comes to costs and prices, we have to do it in closed meeting to protect our negotiations. But I would encourage you all to support this motion, which merely authorises the General Manager to commence negotiations. And as again has been mentioned, if those negotiations are successful and the two parties can agree on a purchase price, and that will come back to us with a full report of other factors that we might need to consider, and we will have that opportunity to make that final decision. So I commend the motion to my colleagues.
Thank you, Alderman Warren. So the motion before the Chair is that we authorise the GM to commence negotiations. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Which brings us to Alderman's question time. At 12.1 and 12.2 there's no matters on notice. 12.3 answers at the previous council meeting. They're in the agenda, so we'll take them as read. Questions without notice. Could I start with you, please, Alderman Warren?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Alderman James?
Yes, two questions, thanks. Firstly, regarding the public pier, Mr Mayor, I have asked the question on a number of occasions, and the response I've received, either from the General Manager or from Mr Graham, is that it's still with the contractors. I again asked the question in the public forum of this place, is there any timeline in which this particular public facility will be available for the public to access?
Well,
a timeline.
I can ask...
I can get an answer, please.
I can ask Mr Graham to repeat the answer he gave to Mr Marsh earlier.
No, well...
Through Mr Mayor, the underwater specialised grouting work to the piers is complete. We've undertaken a defects inspection in terms of handing the structure over to council. One non-conformance was identified. Burberry Consulting, the engineers, have confirmed that. We've forwarded that to the contractor, and we're waiting for response as to how the contractor will address this non-conformance. Once I understand how he's going to address the non-conformance, I'll then be in a position to give an estimated opening date to council.
Yes,
do you have a second question?
In relation to that same matter, that non-conformance matter, is that in relation to a major cost, or is it something that would fall within the normal price, tender construction price?
Through Mr Mayor, the cost is unknown. The issue is it's a structural item which requires engineering sign-off. And that's why defects can be... we can open up the pier if there's minor defects, but this is a structural item. So we can't open it to public until all structural items have been signed off by the engineers.
Last and finally, Mr Mayor, I would like to seek some advice from Mr Graham in relation to the Frederick Henry Parade matter. There is on one exit from Frederick Henry Parade, opposite number 1 Frederick Henry Parade in Cremorne, the no entry sign, which is on the actual other side of the road from number 1 Frederick Henry Parade. But there is no one-way sign that people who are obviously travelling into Cremorne and then along Frederick Henry Parade are able to negotiate traffic that would be coming along that same road as part of the one-way in and one-way out. Is it possible for council to consider at its next monthly meeting for a one-way sign in to those houses on number 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 and therefore advise people that it's one way in and one way out. There needs to be some traffic matter identified.
We've got the question. Thank you.
Well, could I have a response?
Well, it was a long question.
Through Mr. Mayor, I'll take that to the internal traffic working group and we'll advise the Alderman after investigation.
Thank you. Alderman Von Berto. Alderman Edmonds.
Yeah, got a couple workforce ones actually. It's I made myself a couple of notes. Bear with me. I just wanted to check the thresholds around sort of how many people becomes a public event when it comes to use of, say, our barbecue facilities and things. Like I know when we had the golf course campaign, we had more than 100 people at the barbecue facilities at Kangaroo Bay. I know that some of the community organisations, political parties, etc., have had barbecues throughout our sort of barbecue facilities. But I've been informed that ASU is trying to hold a barbecue for about 30 people, but needs to do all the paperwork as if it's a major event. Can I just check that's actually necessary?
Might have to take that on notice, I think, rather than try and answer off the top of the head. Wonder if the General Manager can get back to you on that.
Yep, sure.
Okay.
Second one, obviously it was only 3 short weeks ago we had the debate about we had the motion about vaccinations and encouraging people to get vaccinated. Obviously we had the photo that's since appeared in the hard copy of the Eastern Shore Sun. It's great. It's even beautifully positioned next to an ad.
The question, please.
What measures are we putting in place to actually get our own workforce, some of who are out in the field 5 days a week, to get their jabs? Are we supporting them to take time off to do it? Do we have sick leave provisions, etc. for
General Manager
organisation?
Yes, thank you. That's a very good question. We've had a program in place, an informal program, but we've communicated with staff on a number of occasions that the time they need to go and get their vaccination, they can simply take that. Just let your manager know, go and get your jab and return to work. And if anyone feels unwell, then we treat that as sick leave. But we take a fairly relaxed view about that, and we're encouraging people to do that. We haven't been keeping track of how many people have had their vaccination. We've left that as a matter for them, mainly because we haven't had any sort of mandatory requirements other than a couple of areas of the business.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Bond.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question also regards staff, and you'll recall that last council meeting, in reference to the quarterly report, I asked some questions regarding staff metrics. And I am getting to a question, but I'm delighted that the CFO came back to me very promptly. And of the 15 resignations that we had for that period of time, 8 of those positions had been filled. It was indicated to me in this comprehensive response that the balance of 7 were going to be filled by in this quarter by September 21. I just wondered how we're going with that. And also I note too, just as a comment, that the workers' comp situation seems to be in a very good, considering our size, in a very good place. But I'm more concerned about ensuring that we have those 7 positions filled.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mayor, the recruitment program's an ongoing program all the time, obviously. So in terms of those 7 positions, I could get you some particular details, but those details change week by week as we're recruiting and so forth. So I can take that on notice and get some more information for you.
Alderman Walker.
Yeah, could you pass that along, or can I give this to you for asking my question? I received the rates notice this week, as did many, obviously, across the municipality. And on the very back section of the rates notice, and I want to say this from the absolute start, I in no way suggest any involvement from anyone around this table whatsoever. But at the very back of it was the title, Go Green, Go Paperless. And what I've put next to it is a bit of political material from the Greens Party. And the reason I've done this is because the colouring and font looks close to the point of almost plagiarism. And I would be deeply concerned, especially if it wasn't this September it was coming up, but say it was next September it was coming up, that it looks almost identical in font and styling to corflutes and other distributions. So
it's outrageous.
So when it comes to, and I think this is a situation which you might describe as a cock-up rather than a conspiracy.
Oh, okay.
But I would ask that serious reflection is put onto the styling for messages like this, because had it been securing Clarence's future with a blue sort of epithet...
Oh, that would...
I don't understand what this is about, Alderman Walker.
Okay, so the top two-thirds of that is the back of the rates notice we received, okay?
Yep.
So the very bottom so that's the middle bit is the message, and what I've photocopied just below it is some of the promotional material of a political party, and I'm pointing out the closeness in the colour guide and the font, and I'm asking...
so it's not part of our notice?
No. We take that on notice. Well, I would express that it would be highly problematic if this was the case closer to an election time. I don't assume anything... Well, I don't assume bad faith.
So what's the question?
I think blues...
Is that appropriate? And do you acknowledge the closeness, and will it happen again?
We'll be more sensitive to that. Are there any more questions? Alderman Ewing, Alderman Kennedy? Alderman Mulder?
I've got one question which you'll probably want to take on notice, and it's come from a ratepayer, but it just relates to our reporting of legal expenses, and they would like some breakdown of the legal expenses that council incurs by department rather than by staffing. For example, you know, when we go out to brief lawyers on planning matters versus when we go to brief them on court challenges, or when we go to brief someone just to get a legal opinion on some matter, such as the abandoned hotel in Kangaroo Bay. So that was the question, is could we have a breakdown of the legal costs?
Can we take that on notice?
Suggested.
Thank you.
What, you don't know?
That brings us to the end of the open session of council. So if we could close off the feed, please. And I'll take this opportunity of thanking those members of the public who stayed with us to this point.